All right, so this is the February 4th, 2022 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee to the BOR. I'm going to just begin actually because this is our new term with our full membership, and maybe I'll just share our new membership list, if that makes sense. Do we want to do that? We can, I know that it's been shared with you all. That way we can all just look right at it. Okay. So this is the new membership. Actually, let me make that. Okay, so the voting member for small colleges is Mary Beth. For medium, Matt Dunn. For large, me, but I guess when I'm chairing, Ron. Staff, Lois. And then we knew the voting members from Central, it's David, Blitz, Eastern, Brendan, Southern, Mike Shea, Western, Robin Gustafson, Swof, Diane Robinson, Charter Oak, Patrice. I've never said your last name for Patrice. I'm not going to try now. And administrative faculty, Linda. And then we have our emerita members. So, all right, now that we are all clear on that, I'll stop sharing. And can begin. Do we have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Second? All right. Are there any modifications? There was a proposal to add ACME to the agenda. The list of questions that was sent out. If no one else, I will propose it, and that we add it after the CEAC resolution.
Did we have on this the reports from the chair and vice chair?
Yes.
I'm looking at an old version of it, sorry.
Oh yeah, it's let me put the link to the final version in the chat. There it is. Okay. So I always feel awkward in how I do this. So all in favor of accepting the agenda with the modification of ACME after CEAC?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. And I see that, you know, we're having connection problems from a few folks already. So somehow this weather's still getting at us even virtually. We'll see. Let's move on to the January minutes, and they were circulated fairly late. Take a moment. They are in your email. John.
Hi, Colleen. I don't know if this is a time to mention this, but in the January 21st minutes, I'm listed as a guest and Brian Kaufman is listed as absent, but
Okay.
I've taken his place. So I think that began, you know, at the start of the semester. So
Okay.
I think that he doesn't get mentioned and get put in as being present.
Okay. Well, let's actually begin with January 10th because we're doing 10th,
Oh,
the
sorry.
special meeting and 10th and the 21st. So we'll keep that for the 21st. And for the 10th, you were not present for that one though, right?
Right. I was not present for that. Yeah, it's
But we
taken
can
me a little bit
delete-
to get up to speed joining. I'm going to be like chiming in at all the wrong moments for a little bit. So thanks for
No,
your patience.
That's fine. We're approving 2 sets of minutes today. So that makes sense. So for January 10th, we can delete Brian Kaufman as being absent for that one, right? And I suppose technically you were the person that we weren't in contact with you at that time. So we can just leave that there. Anything else in January 10th? Do you have a motion?
So moved, Kalina.
Fran, a second?
I'll second. This is Mary Beth.
Right? All in favor of accepting the minutes with the deletion of Brian Kaufman as absent?
Hey,
Yes.
Right? Any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, that's Diane and Mikey Fisher and John and Brendan are abstentions. All right, let's move on to January 21st. Motion when you're ready. I know that we're all glancing through them.
I'll move to approve the minutes with the amendments that were mentioned earlier.
Okay, with the deletion of Brian Kaufman as absent and insertion of John Anderson as present.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? That would be Brendan Cunningham, and that's it for abstentions. Okay. Reports of the chair and vice chair. Would you like to begin, David?
okay. Do we want to do now the proposed report to the legislature?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
so.
let me start with that. So I distributed that a little bit on the tardy side, but nonetheless, you've all had a copy of it. And let me see if I can put it up. If I can find my cursor. Oh, file. Sorry,
Sure, let me know if you need me to do it.
I don't know if that's showing it or not. I can't see.
It is, but all the way down at the bottom. Can you drag it Up.
Yeah, hang on a second. Oh boy. Is that better?
No, it's blank now.
Ah. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
And I'll try it again. Sorry. File. I hope that's it now.
Mhm.
Okay. So, we are required by Section 185 of the statutes to file a annual report from the FAC to the committees of the legislature concerned with higher education and appropriations. And whether we've done it in the past or not, it seems a good idea now to do it, because we're also expecting the board to also meet its obligations under Section 185. For example, to have a joint meeting biannually with the Faculty Advisory Committee, and also for them to file a report indicating how they are respecting the distinct missions of the colleges and universities. So the effort here is to get it all done in 5 pages and to send it to the chairs of the Higher Education Committee, the Consolidation Committee, to the Appropriations Committee, and so forth, and as well meet with them. So at the very beginning, we have the questions and concerns, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The background issues are sketched out briefly. We could have gone into a lot more details, but the point is we can always explain details when we meet with the various chairs and co-chairs or other members of the legislature who may be interested in meeting with us. I know that Kalina has done a fantastic job of contact with members of the legislature. There's one small change in number 6 when I talk about curricular actions taken by the board despite the advice and criticisms of faculty directly involved. There was a 4th item, but that was repeated in number 7, which is fiscal actions taken by the board without either sufficient consultation of those affected or explanation of the modifications or long-term funding. And that's the hiring of 174 advisors when there is no clear funding for those positions after FY23. And I've included there also that they haven't coordinated with mental health counselors, which is obviously important. So that's a small change. A second change to what you received was that Linda has requested that I refer to the State College, Charter Oak, as the online State College, and I've made that change throughout. So we have in the first 11 points, a clear statement of the problems that we identify. In section 12, nonetheless, some of the positive changes, the working group of the FAC and the vaccine mandate last year, the joint meeting of the FAC and the BOR, although we note that in our view, this does not replace our request for a regular monthly report from the FAC as a committee for the board, just as they have regular reports from their various committees of the board, such as ASA or finance or personnel. The third point was the listening tour that the new president of the CSCU had undertaken. And one should add in his latest email to us, which I think is worthy of note, that there was clearly a change in their negotiating strategy. And the chief negotiator has in effect been replaced. That would have been, and I think that's a good thing. And it should be noted, I think as well, that independently of those negotiations, the monetary aspects of the university and college, I believe the colleges as well, yes, the colleges as well, will not be done at the local or the agency level, but at the level of Ceac. And I think that will be ultimately favorable to us as well. So those were positive changes. And I noted as well the effort to revive transfer articulation agreements, which we have discussed at some length with Steve Marcellinus, and which we approved in principle, at least at our last meeting. Problems we identify: the recruitment, retention, and graduation of students, the achievement gap between majority and minority students, the underfunding of public higher education, and the deteriorated relation between the FAC, the board, and the system office. conditions for resolution of that, these are items that we discussed some time ago in our Back to Basics resolution from last year. Respect for the distinct missions of the colleges and universities, and that includes having the board issue a report each year on how that is being done, because that was one of the conditions for the merger of the community colleges and universities in the first place. We have, of course, common teaching responsibilities, how research is articulated between two different types of institutions, and other considerations that may differ. And so the legislature has that requirement, and we think that that has to be fully respected. Secondly, we respect the autonomy and integrity of the constituent institutions. That goes to the heart of the students' first proposal, to eliminate the accreditations of the 12 community colleges. We are completely opposed to that, and that's reaffirmed here, along with a suggestion that basically they should follow the system, the board should follow Section 185 as it defines the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. And it defines it, and you'll see at the bottom, I've reproduced it, as the state system of public higher education to consist of one, the University of Connecticut and its campuses, but two, obviously us, and there are three components: the regional community technical colleges, which shall be known collectively as the Regional Community Technical College System, Charter Oak State College, and the Connecticut State University System. And so really, CSCU is a system of systems, two of which are themselves systems. Obviously, Charter Oak has just one instance, but nonetheless, both the community colleges and the state universities are considered as systems, and the legislation does talk about the constituent units. As used in the general status, means those units in subdivisions 1 and 2 of this section, and that includes, obviously, the individual community colleges, at least implicitly. And it's clear to me, at any rate, that if the board is going to get a go-ahead from NESHE to eliminate the independent accreditations of the 12 community colleges, then Section 185 can no longer read the Regional Community Technical College system, and it will have to be amended to read the Connecticut State Community College, and in which case I believe the legislators will have an occasion to express their views on whether that is a good idea or a bad idea. So that's an important point, I think. And thirdly, if we go back now to respect shared governance, obviously a complicated question, but we recognize that there is a predominance of administration, for example, in setting budgets, although we have an advisory role. But we want them to recognize that we, as faculty, have control over curriculum and pedagogy. And I suspect that Kalina will talk more about that when we talk about the ASA meeting. But nonetheless, that is important, so that we need to properly understand shared governance, and certainly that has not been the case up to now. And repeated then again in 4, respect faculty control of curriculum and pedagogy. We then have the proposal for actions that the legislature can take, because when you meet with legislators, I would suspect that they're going to say, okay, so that's your criticisms, your complaints, or however they may characterize them. Well, what do you want us to do? Well, we do want them to do a number of things. Firstly, as a point I mentioned before, any change to the status of the community colleges, such as their fusion into a single institution, requires revising Section 185, 10A1, subsection 2, to replace the regional community technical colleges with the name of the so far unaccredited Connecticut State Community College, and therefore legislative approval to that change. Number 2, this is the problem of the status of the chair and the vice chair of the Faculty Advisory Committee. We are considered as ex officio non-voting members. In contrast, for example, to the chair and the vice chair of the Student Advisory Committee, who are full voting members of the board, and they even vote, for example, on curricular changes which may directly affect them. What we're asking for is an equivalent status, with the exception of voting on the contracts for faculty and staff. And we think this is important because up to now, what happens at board meetings and at committee meetings is we bring our comments, our criticisms, our suggestions for improvement, but we don't have the means of making an amendment. And of course, for all of you who have participated in your faculty senate or equivalent governing body, that's how you express the changes that you want to make. Without that possibility, we take up time at meetings, and we are perhaps perceived by members of the board as prolonging the meeting without any reasonable outcome. And the outcome should normally be an amendment or a proposal to modify the resolution. For example, when the board last year approved a $6 million cut to the budgets of the 4 universities, I brought up at that meeting, and I asked the question, had the presidents of the 4 universities been consulted on this? Because it directed those changes to cuts in part-time budget and budgets for university and graduate assistants. And the answer was no. Well, normally I would have simply said, fine, then this has to be returned to the finance, cannot be sent over to the board until that has been done and we have their feedback. But as an ex officio non-voting member, there's nothing more I could say except that. And of course, they then went on to the next point in the agenda. So this is actually a fairly important item, which requires nonetheless a modification to section 185. The third point that we make is that the legislature and its appropriate higher education committee should request a full accounting of how the board is maintaining the distinct missions of the 3 component parts: the community colleges, the online state college, and the state universities. I mentioned that earlier. The fourth point, the legislature, in conjunction with joint efforts by faculty, staff, and administration to improve the quality of teaching, learning, research, and outreach, needs to move towards full funding of public higher education. And I know that Kalina is working on the target number, and what we propose here is simply at least an increase of 10% per year until full funding is reached. I believe in the last budget, there was a 5% increase to the CSU budget, but that was mainly or almost entirely to cover contractual increases in salary and increases in fringe benefits. If we are to move towards full funding, then the legislature is going to have to significantly increase, we're proposing at least doubling, the amount of additional funds that it makes. Now that number could have been 15%. That's an indicator number. And fifthly, that legislatures take back a portion of the oversight that was ceded to the Board of Regents in 2011 and make sure that questions with which we begin this report are answered conclusively before the accreditations of our community colleges are irretrievably lost. Right? And reaffirming once again the overwhelming sentiment of faculty and staff as evidence in votes of no confidence in system leadership, the BOR and Students' First Consolidation plans in 2019, that we do not believe that the proposal to replace the colleges is adequate. So that's the report, which I would like you to comment upon and amend as you may think appropriate and approve, so that on that basis, Kalina and I can continue can go forward and meet with members of the legislature on this. That concludes my report at any rate on the report. So if there could be a motion to approve this, we could then discuss it.
I'll make that motion, David.
Thanks.
I'll second it, David.
Thank you.
Brendan?
Hi, I just had a few things that came to mind. I just by way of language, we kind of have different notions of mergers that are kind of there's the sort of students first merger, and then there's the merger of the system. And I would just maybe recommend using the term federation when it comes to the creation of the CSU system rather than merger, just to differentiate between the different types of mergers that have happened and might happen. I'm kind of curious about the timing on when this brief is done to the General Assembly, because my understanding is in March, we're likely to see a tuition increase At least I don't know if that's only the on the university campuses or across the whole system. But I'm kind of curious about how we frame, the request for additional funding, uh, in light of the fact that tuition may be going up in March. And then I just also had a question about mental health funding. I know there's a movement to bolster student mental health funding on campuses, and are we requesting the 10% on top of that, or is that part of the mental health funding? Okay, and the last one, I don't know how much this resonates on other campuses, but our faculty has been discussing this Chronicle of Higher Education article called The Great Faculty Disengagement, which makes the point that there's a morale crisis among faculty throughout higher education in the United States. And it might be good to articulate the fact that, the harm that's been done to faculty morale throughout this pandemic due to the hardball contractual negotiations and lack of shared governance is something that needs to be remedied. In fact, our enrollment crisis may be directly attributable to that morale crisis. So that's just my own view, but I those were thoughts that I had. I know it's kind of a lot. I could kind of write it up, but thanks for letting me share that.
Brendan, first of all, yeah, I think at points I can call it consolidation rather than merger when talking about the community colleges. And the idea of a federation, that's an excellent suggestion. That's really what we should be. We should be a so the system of systems, and I'll put in brackets federation so that people can better understand that. And in a federal system, there's, central power, but there's also local power, right? And you can't simply have the central power treading over the local institutions. So that's number one. Number two, on the tuition question, right, I think this is independent of it. It's a question of the allocation to the CSCU, which is then divided really into four parts: the community colleges, the universities, Charter Oak, but also the fourth part is the system office, and that is taking up a considerable and growing proportion of that budget. For the mental health issue, that's really important because the proposal to have 174 new advisors. I mean, besides the fact that it's being funded out of soft money, doesn't take into account the really essential thing about retention, and that's the mental health issues, right? And so there's advising and mental health. What I understood for the community colleges was that they were going to have sort of like a remote a contract with a remote provider. It has to be person to person, right? And that's really something that I think maybe we could note in passing here. And finally, on your fourth part, yes, I think that's a major question, and I will definitely add something to that in the section on. There is a section here where that would be appropriate. When we talk about the problem, the disaffection, or the relationship between the FAC and faculty, right? I think it needs to be added that, yeah, there is a significant morale problem. And you're quite right in pointing out that is a combination of the negotiations, which started off very badly and are still present in the mind of faculty, even though I think there has been some improvement, both at the system level and at the CBAC, as concerns CBAC. But also, secondly, that you have the COVID issues, and there have been staff who've been quite unhappy with the fact that while they could have done their work remotely, they were not allowed to. And then there's faculty who were forced to come on ground who thought they should have been at least to a greater extent remote. So I'll definitely add that in. And what we're looking at, I think, are significant retirements come June. I mean, I think we're going to be surprised at the number of people. It's not only folks with gray hair like me who are sort of past their retirement date, but still think they have some useful function to offer. I think a lot of people are going to, the Great Resignation, as you mentioned, is going to have a considerable impact. And I don't know that there's any planning that's been done other than that they can save money by not paying hundreds of people who are probably going to retire. still, that's a hit to the pension, to the retirement fund. So I will certainly add those points in and consider them as friendly amendments.
Can I just ask, well, I want to offer a little clarification and ask for a little bit more clarification from you, Brendan. So in terms of the funding and the relationship between funding and tuition, I think that, you know, at FAC for years, we have been talking about the fact that even just this model where we increase funding through tuition and the amount of weight we place on tuition is unacceptable. You know, this is a fairly wealthy state and we contribute so little, right? Not enough to it. So what we actually want to move towards is a much more healthy sort of setup where we are not over reliant on tuition and we are kicking in a lot more from the state. So the ask is actually aspirational. But even if we weren't talking aspirationally, we are we're looking at we've dug ourselves a hole as a system. There is a deficit to fill in. We don't have the exact numbers yet. I think we expect to get them like today or within the next few days. But even just there is an urgency even right now to fill a gap, both at the community colleges and the CSUs. So that ask is real no matter what. And then in terms of clarification from you, I'm wondering, you said like there's a morale problem. And that the morale problem is not unrelated from the enrollment crisis. And I'm wondering, so my feeling as you say this is that the way I would want to express that, so as we edit the document, I just want to make sure we're capturing it right. The way I'd want to express that is that the causes of the morale problem are possibly also the causes or the environment that creates the morale problem is the environment that contributes to an enrollment problem. Does that make sense? As opposed to it is the despondency of the faculty that cause students to not enroll. And have I captured that correctly?
Yeah, definitely,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, yeah, I could share additional thoughts about the source of these morale issues, but yeah, that gets at it. So thank you.
Thanks. I don't know if there's further feedback, but I think maybe we should just add, especially since there are new members here, that though the FAC, you know, by statute is required to have joint meetings with the BOR twice yearly, no less than twice yearly is what the statute says. I'm not sure that that has ever really been satisfied. However, in past years, it has been fairly consistent that at least twice a year, once each semester, the FAC is permitted to provide a report that is presented to the board as an information item. There's usually very little discussion. It's just presented and we move on. But there has at least been that pattern of 2 reports a year. Last year, we were encouraged to, instead of providing a report, actually work on creating these meetings, or rather, we have been pursuing the meetings for a couple of years, and we were promised a meeting, and we held off our first report in anticipation of that meeting. We didn't really get a meeting until, what was it, November, December?
November.
Yeah, and it was, you know, exactly 1 hour long. We were allowed to present one issue. The board presented one issue. We talked really, really fast as if we were in a legislative hearing. There was no back and forth. So it really it didn't achieve what we needed to achieve. And when David and I asked to put our reports on the agenda for the last BOR meeting of the year, we were denied that opportunity. And what we were told was that instead of that, we're going to try to schedule a joint FAC board meeting for February. As you can guess, we've heard nothing about that joint meeting, and it takes quite a lot of doing to get all the board members' schedules together with ours. So, you know, we are going into a year where we're going to have significant change to our system, with really no official input internally from faculty and staff. We're also we are coming out of years of unprecedented challenges to higher ed, COVID, etc. Again, with no input directly from faculty and staff. So this is significant. We're certainly forwarding this to higher ed chairs, and we have been in fairly consistent communication with the higher ed committee, and we will be requesting a meeting to discuss this also with the chairs of appropriations. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and I'll note that I did make an addition, because that was an omission on my part in the original draft of this, so that you have it there. I think you can see it in blue. When we talk about a joint meeting of the FAC and BOR as one of the improvements, and that's true, that was an improvement. And I think we need to recognize when improvements do happen, despite the limitation of the 1 hour and only one of our issues. It does, nonetheless. But I say it's added. We note that holding these joint meetings does not replace our request for a regular FAC report at each board meeting as a committee for the board, similar to that of committees of the board. Right? And in fact, unlike the committees of the board, such as ASA or finance or personnel, we are explicitly mentioned in the section 185 of the legislation. So that what we're asking for is actually more than just a biannual report, but actually an item on the agenda. It may be that certain months we don't have anything to report. And that happens to the committees of the board, and they simply say no report at this point. But when we do have something to report, there should be an agenda item, and that's something which could be worked out with the board. But I mean, it's important to also mention that. So I agree with you, Kalina, that has to be added, and in fact, I just did.
Right. And you know, I think we just really need to note that while the fact that there's now consideration of the possibility of us all meeting in the same place for the first time, and that is an improvement functionally, our access to the board was reduced, not increased last year. All right, is there any further discussion? Is this the moment for a vote to accept this report with the understanding that we will forward it to the appropriate committees of the legislature? And is there anywhere else it should be forwarded?
Well, I think we should, as a matter of courtesy, send it to the chairman of the board and the president of the CSCU for them to distribute as they deem appropriate.
Of course, yes.
And we might want to send a copy to the governor as well.
Okay.
As a courtesy.
Is Netchi appropriate for this one?
There's somebody else.
All right. We'll circulate it to the world.
Well, I mean, it'll be available in the minutes of this meeting online for anybody to see and download.
Right. It's a public document. All right. So take a vote with that understanding, right? Appropriate committees of the legislature, governor,
and the four
chairman of the
modifications.
board, Netchi, pardon?
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Okay.
I interrupted.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions?
This is Linda Perfetto. I'm here as an alternate for Linda Wilder. I don't think she's here. I would abstain because I haven't been involved in the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Diane, I
Linda-
see a hand. Is that an abstention?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And this is Patrice. I'm going to abstain also.
Okay. All right. Oh, right. So we are still in reports of chair and vice chair. I guess we can begin. The only real board meeting that we've had was ASA, and this is one of those days where we had ASA this morning and FAC this afternoon. So there's not a lot of time to process. Maybe, David, do you want to begin the conversation that we had with them about COVID? And then I have my personal impression of what happened this morning. I have to confirm by looking back at the video that my feelings on the way the conversation went are correct, but I will just give you my impression as I have it right now. But do you want to start, David?
Okay. I circulated to everybody Alice Pritchard's comments on the resolution we passed at our special meeting in January. And so I won't repeat those. We did have a meeting, Kalina and I, with Alice Pritchard and Ken Klusnick about that. And the matter was discussed again at the ASA meeting today. And basically the point which we made was that we didn't want to change or have a new resolution on a vaccine mandate, but we wanted to look at the implementation and improvements that could be made to the resolution that was adopted in June of 2021. And the points that I stressed at the meeting today could be relevant for us as well. First of all was the education component. While we think that the information component has been relatively well done by the system and by the various constituent units, colleges and universities. That is to say, information about when a COVID vaccination clinic will be held on campus, information about wearing masks and maintaining social distancing and so forth. What we did consider was needed improvement was the educational component. That is to say, to explain in relatively simple terms, but nonetheless with some degree of sophistication, what the virus involves, how it infects cells, how it's transmitted, what the vaccines, how they work and what they don't involve. For example, that they don't include fetal cells, as many students and seem to think. And that there we have the faculty and the staff available to do that. I mentioned just at my university, and Mark Jackson will certainly note this, we have at least 3 departments: a biology department, a biomolecular science department, and a chemistry and biochemistry department with faculty who are experts in various aspects of this. At Southern, there's the Department of Public Health, and that's been there for decades. And that's just 2 universities. Across the system, there are dozens of people who could work on material that could be further educational, not merely informational about the mandate. And so that was a question of participation, which will help also in the perception by faculty of the implementation of the vaccine mandate. Secondly, we mentioned that the proposal included having a meeting of at each campus of the university or college president or CEO or their delegate, the Senate, faculty Senate, and the 2 unions, faculty and staff, to discuss the statistics and the progress at each individual campus. This is difficult to do in a group setting where you'd simply distribute the information to everybody and people respond, for example, to a listserv. We thought that this was a good way of being able to monitor how progress is being made to increase the rate of vaccination, decrease the number of non-medical exemptions, and so forth, and see what adjustments have to be made at each campus. The third thing was the non-medical exemptions. And of course, we've discussed that here on a number of occasions. The original FAC working group report was not to have any. As a result of meeting with the executive of the system back in 2021 in May, we compromised on having non-medical exemptions, but we thought that they should be kept as limited as possible. And we were disappointed when it turned out that all non-medical exemptions were being automatically agreed upon. Now, back a year ago, the vaccines still had emergency use authorization. Now, both Pfizer and also Moderna have the BLA, the biologic license authorization. Moderna just at the beginning of this week, after what must have been a fairly intensive verification of their production process, since we know from quite some time ago that their vaccine is quite safe and effective. And secondly, that there was in the back of the minds, especially of the system office attorney, the problem of possible legal challenges. But since then, the Indiana University case has reaffirmed the 1905 precedent, actually, of Jacobson and the city of Cambridge. And we've had closer to home cases both at University of Massachusetts and at University of Connecticut, which have been reaffirmed in terms of vaccine mandates, so that the authorization impediment to reducing non-medical exemptions and the legal impediment have both been eliminated. And that's one thing that we want to see, and it's apparently not really happening. The other question which we brought up was the Medicaid issue. At the universities, the students at least, and the faculty and staff voluntarily, can upload proof of verification, i.e. of vaccination, i.e. the vaccination card. They take a photo of it with their cell phone, and they can upload it through the Medicaid software. That's not happening at the community colleges, and we had quite a discussion with Alice Pritchard over that. Her counter argument was, well, faculty and staff aren't being required to do it. And secondly, there aren't medical facilities at the community colleges, so that we don't have really they don't have the means of doing Medicaid, which ensures confidentiality of the uploaded documentation. And our response was that, there's been a year now to get that done. The CSU system has received hundreds of millions of dollars in HERE funds. Some of those could certainly have been used at the community colleges to set up a secure system of verification by uploading of photos of the vaccination cards, and that's in a sense still lacking. And I think the last issue was on other matters which have to be decided pretty soon. Even if we're talking about policy for the fall, that needs to be decided probably by March, if universities and community colleges are going to get ready to implement it. That includes examples of booster shots, questions of whether or not to maintain the mask mandate, and so forth. So those issues were brought up. I mean, it extended the meeting of the ASA by at least another 40 minutes. But I think we had a discussion. At least one member of the committee, other than Kalina and myself, spoke up and had some questions. That was Aviva Budd. And so I think that we are beginning to have a discussion and a conversation. I think we cleared up some misconceptions. For example, that people at the system office didn't understand why we're asking for more educational material when they were providing all of this informational material, but the distinction between the two was made clear. And it's pretty clear that we have a disagreement on the possibility of implementing Medicaid type software for proof of verification in proof of vaccination at the community colleges. Kalina?
Thanks. So that was comprehensive, David. Thank you. I'm just going to be unhelpful now in my report of how the conversation went, because I believe that it was there was a bit of, I don't know, dishonesty or misdirection. Way too much of the conversation centered on the difficulties of getting unions to agree to providing proof of vaccination, which to my knowledge was never requested. And even if it were, would be beside the point, right? So there was a lot of conversation about, well, we'd have to require it of employees also, which was our recommendation in the first place, which is not an obstacle to the public health aim, because students compose the larger proportion of our population. And again, if unions had pushed back on that, then perhaps that could enter the conversation. As far as I know, no such thing happened. So, there is something to talk about, especially when it concerns evidence of vaccinations at community colleges. And there has been a lot of conversation about that. Why would the CSUs have it and we don't have it? And that question has yet to be answered, other than a sort of, what I would call an unhelpful conversation about the difficult and irrelevant conversation about the difficulties of dealing with unions and getting this kind of evidence, and about the desire to require the same of both students and employees, which again is precisely what we propose. So yeah, I because there was a conversation to be had there about how to adequately implement the board policy in a way that keeps us all safe. And it was, I think, derailed a bit too much by that kind of misdirection. Again, I just came out of the meeting this morning. Maybe on reflection, I put too much emphasis on that. But there we go.
Yeah, I think there was a clarification, let me put it that way, of the differences, right? And
Yeah.
that is, I think, helpful. These conversations are not easy. And, you know, I don't really relish being the person who extends the meeting to double its length because we have all these things to say. But we do have these things to say. And there was conversation at this meeting. I understand, Kalina, your concerns about it. I'll take the glass half full, and you're taking the glass half empty on this one.
Yeah.
But I think we have a basis to proceed further with some of the members of the board. I'm not quite sure how we're going to handle this at the next board meeting, whether they're going to include this as an information item on the agenda. Clearly, there's a number of other issues that have to get resolved.
Right. And as it stands, I think one of the simplest and most straightforward sorts of remedies that we could have imagined might come out of this dialogue might have been, okay, we can extend Medicat to community colleges. I'm not sure that we're fully clear yet on why that is impossible, but it does seem that if there is any way to do that, it'll be months and months away, and maybe irrelevant by that point. So we still don't have a clear answer, or at least I'm not sure what the clear answer is, but I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, and the rest is more complicated. Any conversation about that? If not, I can move on to the other item. Okay. I will say the other thing that I would report on from this morning is just the fact that we had another, and I've shared it with you, the list of aligned programs and courses that went through CCIC last month. They hit ASA this morning. They went through a sort of just informational, and there was some conversation because remember last month we talked about the CEAC resolution from Naugatuck Valley. And actually, let me pause because I'm doing the acronym thing again. So, and there was a question in the chat that I answered, and I should answer more fully here. When we're talking about ASA, we're talking about the Academic and Student Affairs Committee of the Board of Regents. I am a member of that committee, ex officio, non-voting. David attended today as a guest to present on the vaccine mandate, and David is a member of the Finance and Infrastructure Subcommittee of the Board of Regents. So apologies for all of that. So the CEAC, Ron, what is it? The Curriculum
and Education Affairs Committee.
Okay, at Naugatuck Valley. And, you know, we talked last month about the sort of logistical concerns that they had about, you know, regardless of whether there's a desire to go through all of this, just how does a college keep up with the volume of courses and programs coming through their curriculum and department meetings? And it's sort of detailed there just how difficult it is and how, you know, it's just not happening. So included in the board packet with that was the workflow. So if you look at the agenda, which is online, and I'll share a link with you all, but, you know, Board of Regents meetings and agendas, ASA meeting of this morning. Page 106 has the whole workflow of all of the levels of review curriculum goes through. So, you know, I found it necessary to at least bring our concern that certainly at the level of of campus review, this process isn't actually happening at many of our colleges. It's just, we just can't do it that fast. And when you consider the amount of time that we had just spent at that same meeting on a single program that was going through the ASA, and then we were just handed a list of hundreds, right? You're just certainly not getting that level of review. So I just made sure that that was on record there. And, you know, part of the reason that I think it's necessary to bring that up at ASA is because the answer that we got this morning also was that, you know, that's unavoidable because the board has put us on a schedule that we must meet. So if that's how fast it has to go, and if colleges can't review it, that's just how fast it has to go. So we were in the presence of the Academic and Student Affairs Committee of the BOR, who presumably would have the ability to address that issue. So we had that conversation. The other part of that is that so the colleges have established shared governance, actual shared governance structures. The Consolidated College does not have a shared governance structure, and that should be uncontroversial. There was some confusion about that this morning, but it should be uncontroversial because this is a debate we've been having for quite some time. The agreement is that there's a shared governance structure for the Consolidated College, but that will not come into existence until 2023. There's a Senate, there's a curriculum committee, etc., but none of that is in place now. What we do have now is SFASACC, the Student Affairs Academic and Students First Academic and Student Affairs Consolidation Committee, and we have the APRC, which is the Aligned Program Review Committee of the SFASACC. And neither of those is a representative body. Now, we have had this issue for quite some time. So I'm going to say this out loud, even though I think it's insulting to say it to adults out loud, because apparently it has to be said out loud. If you haven't elected someone to speak on your behalf or authorize them in some way, it is not in any way comforting that they have taken it upon themselves to represent you, right? So if I informed you that I have been representing you in some capacity without your consent or your knowledge for quite some time, that is not a source of comfort, first of all. The only other sense of representative that I can imagine is at use here is a sense in which it's a representative sample, in which case two things have to happen. The size of that sample needs to increase greatly, and it needs to not be a self-selecting set. So there's no sense of the word representative that can reasonably be used to describe these bodies. And the fact that we keep having this conversation, and the fact that the leadership of a college and university system insists that they feel that these bodies are representative, is a source of concern. I don't think that it is controversial in the least, right? So that was presented there today. I believe that we have that resolution that sort of details the challenges that colleges have. The only actual shared governance entities that exist in this whole review process. The challenges that colleges have in actually participating in this curriculum review process, that will be considered today, and that will allow us to sort of give them more detail should we approve or endorse it in some way. We can forward that to ASA so that they can see the actual challenges that we are facing in that way. So that was the that was sort of the largest portion of that, and of course the rest is available online.
Might I just add one thing?
Mhm.
I was horrified to find that I actually knew what APRC and SFA SCA stood for. I had become part of the machine, I think, because for a long time I could not figure out those acronyms, and now I do. I thought, Kalina, you were very clear on that question of what the word representative means, and I think that the difference there was very clear. And you know, there's an inconsistency. I mean, the CSCU has set up an interim executive. I mean, there's an interim president, they're interim vice presidents, they're interim chief officers of the so far non-accredited one community college, but they couldn't set up proper curriculum transitional committees. And that's I think, a problem. I mean, it's definitely an inconsistency.
Are you having dreams about Acme yet, David?
Yes, I should have mentioned that too, but I'm seeing the mental health people at my institution. They're advising me.
Wait a minute, you don't have to call the 1-800 number, David?
No,
That's what
but
we have.
I did once have a tele meeting with a physician from New York City when I was in a hospital. That was something, but it actually worked out. But I do think that, in person is way better, especially for a consultation about, whether you're going to return to normal and have a continued life or not. I'll skip the details. Sometime when we get together in person, I have a whole bunch of anecdotes which I've been saving up for like 2 years, but I haven't been able to.
We're gonna have to do that at the end of spring at least. All right, shall we move on to the next item? Which is actually the COVID resolution and response, which we covered.
Just did
Yeah.
it. We'll continue that conversation. I think, it's pretty clear. I think there are a couple of people on the board who may have noticed that, there are issues, substantial issues that we brought up. And it's just our moral obligation to continue pressing for that.
Yeah. Okay. If there's no further discussion about specifically the COVID resolution and the response to it, our next item is reopening updates. Any objection to moving on to that? Okay, so how are things going? Is there anything we need to share or pass along or address or document?
Brendan brought up the morale issue. I don't know if that's a problem elsewhere. I see Carmen has something.
Yep.
Yeah, we
Carmen
just
and then
had-
Mary Beth.
Okay, yeah, just a small thing. We had a departmental meeting yesterday. And right now, Capital Community College only has like 35% of the classes on ground. And so, we kind of talked about, like, for instance, with we still have lots, like the majority of our lab classes are still online. Whereas most of the community colleges other than Northwestern has a lot of online labs too, but most community colleges have their labs on ground, or most, not all. So that's, just something that we're just noticing a big change, a big difference between the different community colleges, and just that there's a push to get more and more on ground. I'm still just very puzzled, how come, like we have our 4-year colleges for the most part, most of those classes are on ground, and then the high schools and the elementary schools, there's all on ground. There's no options for online, and I'm just not quite sure why the community colleges are sandwiched in the middle, where it just seems to be up to the individual colleges and up to the individual faculty members. Do you want to teach online or do you want to teach on ground? So we had a conversation about that yesterday, and I just really had to try to push to say we really should have labs on ground. We now have students going into nursing school, applying to nursing school, that have taken every single lab course online, have never once been exposed to like a microscope, and generally that is used in all their biology lab classes. So I'm just really concerned why there's not even a push, just that it seems to be up to the individual colleges. And anyway, so that's something we talked about yesterday.
I have something to add to that, if it's all right. So, Carmen, you're absolutely right. From me being in Northwestern, I think there's going to be some pushback from our science department. I don't really know the reason, why, maybe underlying medical conditions. I don't know. But we received an email from our dean, and we were supposed to have a meeting today, but it got canceled because school got canceled. That basically said that, just what you said, we're about 60% at Northwestern online, 40% on ground. And they want to go, I'm assuming system office has been giving directions to Northwestern to say they want it flipped. System office wants Northwestern to go back to the old ways, pre-pandemic ways of class designation, maybe 60% on ground, 40% online, 70-30, something like that. So there's gonna be a big push to come back, even though there was a push now, but now it's being more formalized. But you are correct about the science, and I would agree with you. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I don't know if that's shared, having direction from your deans and such to, come back to school. Because I think a lot of the mandates are going to fall off, maybe even including the masks. So we'll see.
And Mike, when you said pushback, were you saying there'll be pushback from your science department, or that your science department is eager to get folks back in the lab? Okay.
From, and I can't really confirm this, just from what I'm hearing. I believe the science department wants to continue on. I don't believe, I think the majority of it, and I would have to check, but generally speaking, the majority of the science department has not been on campus since the pandemic, since, mid-March 2020, when we all kind of closed. So just to give you a little insight on it and what's happening, and I don't know what's going to happen. We had, like I said, had our meeting today. We're going to push it back to Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll find out more. But I don't know if the rest of the community colleges are sharing that, but we'll see.
Mary Beth?
So I just have two. First, my comment is, and I was working on this data myself, but I think I'm going to have to ask somebody for it, because the information keeps changing so fast that I haven't been able to figure it out. But my sense is that the schedule that was put out originally was closer to like 50 on campus versus online. But I feel like now we have significantly more online, because so many of our on-campus classes didn't run because they didn't fill. So I am one of several faculty members who had an on-campus class get canceled because it didn't run. And so therefore, what was left for me to pick up, because I needed to make load, was an online class that didn't have a staff member on it. And I know several other people that the same thing happened to. So that is just a comment in terms of like the push to have more classes on ground, is that I think, we did make a big push. I mean, several of us, agreed to teach more classes on ground. And now we're not, because they just couldn't fill. So that's just one comment. And then my other comment is, we've just gotten guidance from our CEO that basically as of March 1st, we need to be on campus for all meetings, any activities, everything needs to be on campus. So that's just, which was basically the way things were last semester, but then they gave a little bit more leeway during, the heightened surge in January. But as of March, it looks like we're just supposed to be back on campus for, anytime you have a meeting, it's going to be held on campus in an actual location, as opposed to like a virtual meeting, supposedly at this point.
And Mary Beth, same thing with us at Northwestern, or for my program, criminal justice there. My numbers were single digits for hybrid, which is basically on ground, and the online's almost filled to capacity within 2 weeks. And I think the students, well, for us anyway, for our area, they don't want to come back to class, even though they say they do, because it's so darn convenient. But there's so much that they're missing as well, which we all know.
I'll just say that we had the same experience, definitely in my department at Gateway. I don't know what happened overall, but I had a class that sat, an on-ground class that sat at an enrollment of 3 for months, switched it to online. It filled in days. Well, it got to like 20 or more in days. So, Ron?
One of the things I wanted to bring up is that they changed the testing policy so that vaccinated people are not allowed to be tested on campus anymore, which seems a little strange considering that the Omicron mutation infected vaccinated people quite a bit. But we had, for instance, our hospitality management professor, even though she was fully vaccinated, she would be tested once a week because she worked so closely with the students in the kitchen and things like that. So she wanted to make sure that she was extra cautious. And she showed up to get her regular weekly test, and they told her, no, you're vaccinated, you can't be tested anymore. We're only testing people who are unvaccinated. So that seems to be, again, a way in which they're removing precautions that were probably are probably good to have.
So can I ask, and especially maybe we might have lost Brendan, but like at the universities, the talk of morale, I mean, is there something more general that we need to be talking about other than just COVID policies, COVID anxiety? Is there anything else that we should be discussing? I mean, because when we talk about like the board and the academic institute, there may be policy fixes, there may be ways that we can at least have dialogue with leadership.
The student services, number of people in service in student services is way down. I mean, the resources have been stripped away. I think we have like maybe 2 people in admissions now, and then they look at our enrollment, and our enrollment has cratered. And the reason for that is we're not even going to the high schools anymore, right? We don't have enough people. All those people have been removed from our colleges and and shifted over to system office or retired or whatever, and they haven't replaced them. So so admissions right now is a shell of its former self. And that to me explains a lot about the reduction in our enrollment.
Jen, Mary Beth, and then Mike Shea.
Sorry. Hi. Morale's really low at Three Rivers. People are retiring in droves and citing consolidation and union issues in their contracts as the reason why, very vocally. And people are mostly, I'd say, the biggest frustration for faculty, aside from the lack of support for students relating to issues of technology for online learning, is that we're not really consulted about how we want to teach our courses or how we think it would be best. So I have art professors who really want to be in the classroom, but their classes are forced online because of different things. But the vast majority of people want to be LRON or online, and then they have to go on campus. And it seems to be that they always go after the low-hanging fruit. So like if there are a bunch of English classes, they'll just put a bunch of classes on ground, even if it's not working that effectively. But our online classes are filling really quickly and our on-ground sections are trickling in. And we can't figure out why they're making us I teach and then giving us opportunities to teach online, when for community college students, it's so helpful for so many reasons. And because we've poured our heart and souls into doing it well. So I would say that's the biggest concern. I mean, obviously there's all of the other reasons why people are frustrated and have low morale, but that's ongoing and you all know those issues. But that's kind of the big things that keep standing out at our campus.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that Jen was going to say, I was just going to say, 2 things. One kind of general thing is just that I hear over and over again, just like professional respect and giving people professional discretion to make decisions that they think, work best for their students. And we just feel like everything is just micromanaged to like the nth degree. And the other thing, that I feel like is, I feel like I was saying this, maybe 4 or 5 months into the pandemic, was, there were going to be silver linings to this. There were going to be things that we could figure out that we're gonna work, and maybe we could take advantage of those and go forward. And just this idea that they just want to go back to like business as usual. I don't really know any industry that just wants to go back to like complete business as usual. You know, like I know people who work, you know, for engineering companies, insurance companies, and all of those places have, you know, taken things, you know, like that worked well, like, you know, decreasing the number of meetings, and like allowing people to be virtual part-time, having more flexible schedules. And it seems like we're just not given the discretion, you know, like I, you know, had a friend whose, you know, daughter had to stay home from school and she was teaching on campus, and she said, well, can I just do my class online for that one day so that I don't have to cancel my class? And they said, no, because your class, and she was like, but before pandemic, like I could have done that. Like I would have been given the professional discretion to decide how I wanted to do my class. But now it's like, you know, no, we dictate, you know, completely. And so I think that's just the morale issue from that alone is just all over the place. It is Nantucket. So that's what we're all feeling.
Thanks. Mike Shea?
Yeah, I'm just responding since you asked about the universities, and Mikey may be able to add something to this, but I think the biggest issues at the university, at least at Southern, is the contract negotiations, which is connected to the whole issue of feeling like there's just way too much top-down stuff happening about everything. I think some people are becoming more aware of the issues with the common curriculum for the community colleges in terms of lack of representation that you talk so well about, Kalina, about representation. And then, but because the consequences for that are, if there's a common curriculum, it's going to be very hard for the CSUs not to have to accept those curriculum. And so if the math and English ACME stuff is happening, you know, we're concerned, just like you are, that those students will not be prepared. And I don't know if we can require extra work from them or something. So that's not widespread at Southern yet, because I don't think people understand it fully. But I've tried to bring it up at the Senate, and Deb Weiss is, as Senate President, is well aware of it and is concerned about it. She's also concerned that there aren't more departments concerned. I think a lot of people at the universities think that, well, we can just require extra stuff of students, but I don't think that's going to be viable. Anyway, so I think the morale issues are, again, top-down stuff, more from the system office than from our own administration, which is a relatively, you know, we have, I think, a really president who comes out of kind of social work issues, so he kind of understands people and he's got empathy. So, so I think we're lucky with the administration situation. So I hope that helps.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo, you know, and I think we've had parallel experience at QVCC of the top down, and I think that there is frustration and morale for, you know, many of the reasons that, you know, you guys have cited, and Jen has a, you know, parallel experience at Three Rivers down the road. But there are paradoxical things going on too, because, you know, part of the low morale, I think, speaking for myself and some of the faculty members, my colleagues who I've talked to, it has to do with not being together in a traditional real-time space. And on one hand, you know, online sections and online modalities are good for our students in the sense of, you know, negotiating complex personal schedules. They're good maybe overall, you know, when we're facing this crisis in enrollment and a dearth of sections of getting bodies in seats. But the question of whether or not it's good for learning is a separate question. And I really feel that many of our students do not learn well in the online environment. And there are all kinds of questions about that and concerns that I have about that. So, you know, you know, it feels there are just interesting contradictions that come up. You know, like I feel like we're getting really a push to more online learning, including asynchronous online learning, which I think just is not a very good choice for many of our students, including to the point where, you know, like with our strategic plan that's being developed at QVCC now, you know, language about exploring and developing and expanding online options. And I had suggested just language, saying, while continuing to support the traditional classroom. And I'm not so arrogant to think it's just because I suggested this for the strategic plan, it should be, that language should be automatically put in. But it struck me as interesting that was left out. Right. I mean, because that's a silence then. Does that mean then that we don't support traditional learning, or we're not supporting traditional learning? So for health reasons, the pandemic reasons, I really want us to have the online options, including meeting online. So like when the Omicron percentage rate here, the positivity rate was through the roof, we're being forced to have in-person office hours. And yet there's this push for online learning. So for health reasons, I want to be able to shift to online, and make those choices. And I think that's another inequity, by the way. My colleagues right up the road at Eastern, from what I understand, can have this flexibility, especially in the first weeks, by going to hybrid formats where they feel, that community college professors do not have that kind of agency, at least where I'm at. So anyway, I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit muddled, but I think that the issues are complex. And I am concerned about, as we move into a space that maybe we can meet together healthfully. Because that's the other thing, I'll just say this maybe to wrap up. It seems to me that there's like this false or unnecessary conflict between being safe and having a good education. We could meet in person and be safe if we had adequate testing, adequate protocols, measures, really N95, KN95 masks for everybody. At QVCC, student could wear a completely worthless gaiter, or a bandana, and they'd be nothing I can do about it. They're following the so-called rules and protocols. If we did it right, we wouldn't even have to have this conflict or conversation.
And it is super uncharitable to say this, but we can reflect to some extent on students' willingness to come back on ground at the community colleges as a measure of their confidence in the protocols that we have in place, right? How much, we don't know, but it's worth considering. Matt, and then Fran, you had a hand up. Is it down now? Okay, so Matt.
So I was going to mention two things, and one is I've noticed on my campus. So we were encouraged at HCC to teach at least 2 classes on the ground in the spring, and now we're being encouraged to teach at least 1 class on the ground in the fall. There's been mention by administration of sending out a survey to students to determine what their preference is for the fall. But for a lot of faculty and staff, one of the challenges has been this new job responsibility, which is policing COVID protocol in your classroom, which is a challenge to do when you're simultaneously trying to teach, or if you're a staff member, you're trying to do your job. You have this new, and most of us aren't trained as health experts. So it's this like new skill set we're being encouraged to oversee in the spaces we oversee on campus, which is challenging. So that's something that has been, that's been brought up and is a challenge. And also students, I think, also now have like new expectations. So if you're teaching a traditional class and they get COVID, I've had students say, hey, can you send me like a videotape of like everything that happened, like a video of what you did in class? And it's like, I don't have access to that technology. So it's like you're teaching a traditional class, but there's an expectation from some students that you're going to be teaching it in multiple modalities, which is obviously impossible. So that's one thing that I think has led to some faculty and staff having, these new responsibilities on campus. And then the other thing I would mention is there's a lot of anxiety about consolidation, obviously, and specifically concerns about this new structure and losing chairs and who's going to be in charge of making faculty schedules in the future. And that's led to a lot of questions about basically, you know, who's going to determine what courses we teach next year or the year after. And there's just a lot of anxiety about, just because there's all this uncertainty. So those are the things I've been noticing coming up in some meetings and just hearing about on my campus.
I want to add a couple of things that I've heard. And, you know, the beginning of the semester I thought it was pretty dramatic. Like, I heard stories about people sobbing in hallways. I heard stories about people searching for jobs while in their, you know, opening of semester meetings, you know, cautionary tales at governance meetings personally at Gateway. But I think that another thing that I thought was really impactful was how staff across the system were treated. The extension of the telework agreement for most of the executive branch was extended twice for all the other divisions, except for those under the BOR. And for us, it was not extended, right? So we had staff working in offices, more or less full time, fully aware that that had been granted to other folks. And I think that kind of felt, especially, you know, given what you said, Mary Beth, about how folks had like honed the skill of doing this really well virtually. And then to have that when it may have benefited them, taken away from them, was demoralizing. In addition to that, the only the savings that have been reported in the past few years come from a single place, and it's savings through attrition from not replacing folks who are lost out of departments. So the very same people, you know, working in these departments are also working in vastly understaffed departments and working sometimes double and triple time. And in addition to that, for some of our departments that have been moved into the shared services, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Folks have been asked to, I believe, like reapply for their jobs, sometimes for less pay than they're currently getting. And while that hasn't been finalized, it's still in conversation. The conversation has extended on for almost a year. So folks certainly have questions about, you know, the security of their jobs, and you know, folks are, if they can leave, they will leave, which is what happened at Gateway. That's why we had no counselors in 2020, because anyone who can find something more secure is out. So yeah, so $20 million of understaffing, you know, we've been compensating for, certainly at the colleges, and I don't know what's been going on at the universities. That feels like something, and I think that's part of what we're feeling also. So I just wanted to add that in. Anything else? Okay. All right. So, I mean, I think we could, you say that you're talking at Eastern, right, about this sort of trend across the country. And I mean, it's to be expected given all that we're going through right now. But at the same time, it's worth, I think, continuing the conversation if we think about ways that we could translate these worries into whether it's policy recommendations or something down the line. Maybe we can come back to this next month, right? Next item, nominations for the community college chair and university chair. Our term is officially up now that we have our voting members straightened up. So are there any nominations?
I nominate Kalina and David.
I accept. Are there any others?
Second that nomination.
Second.
Say it again, Brendan.
I was just seconding if we need a second.
Oh, okay.
I thank both of you if you're willing to serve another term. You've done a great job.
Thank you. Is that it for nominations? All right. David, you're muted.
I think technically somebody has to move to close nominations.
Who moved?
I'll make that
Somebody
motion.
say.
And then what? We vote on closing nominations?
Well, first, let's thank you two for agreeing to accept. No, we really appreciate it. Been doing a great job.
I totally agree. Here, here.
Thank you for your confidence. We'll try again for another 2 years. All right, and now we vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Those hands were disappearing, so those are in favor and not opposed? Okay. Now we'll do it again. Any opposed? And abstentions? All right. Moving along. Lois, that's right. We need to nominate secretary.
Mhm.
Yes, you do.
We do. Would you accept if we nominated you again?
You would like to nominate me again?
I nominate Lois.
Second.
Okay.
I move that we close nominations.
Can I say what this is for again? I support Lois, but what's this position for?
Secretary.
Secretary.
That's good.
All right.
Again, I'd like to thank Lois. I've been secretary in a lot of committees. As you know, it is thankless work, but it's important work.
It really is, but you do it so well, Lois.
It's so thankless that all you get is to be secretary again.
Thank you so much, guys.
I think the cat needs to vote.
I think he's napping right now.
All right. So we've moved to close that nomination. And we've seconded. Anyone? All
David
right.
did.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Here we go again. Thanks. All right. Proposed meeting date changes for March and April meetings. So you mentioned last time that there are, is Pam here? Pam, are you here? Okay.
I am.
Oh,
am.
hi.
Hi.
So, there are a bunch of months this year where the
Yes.
ASA and FAC are on the exact same day.
And we talked, are those the three coming up, March, April, May?
Yeah.
And those are the same ones that you proposed new dates to last meeting?
Yeah, but you weren't here to kind of, I had a feeling that you had some, justification of why that might make sense that I might have been missing. So I just wanted to
No,
know.
it was a misunderstanding, I would imagine, on my part, because I'm not involved in the cycle through Curriculum Council. Is that the one that comes before ASA?
It's CCIC, which is the
whatever the acronym is, the meeting.
Coordinating Committee of the Consolidation.
No, it's Community College Implementation Committee.
Yes.
Whatever
Yes, that's right.
whatever that group is before it gets to ASA, to the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, I wasn't aware of your enrollment or the need to process the information that came out of that. So I'm more than happy to, mea culpa. I can certainly, you give me old dates, new dates, and I'll certainly list and update the calendars and this notice with Secretary of State and take care of all the communications for you.
Thanks. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something that you were thinking about.
No. I just wasn't aware. So I appreciate that. And we can certainly get that moving, a couple of keystrokes and it'll be done.
Cool. Right. So the proposal then is that our next meeting dates are March 11th and April 8th. My suggestion is that we move them 1 week earlier, which will allow them to come a little after the CCIC meetings, relevant CCIC meetings, and before ASA, so that if there is any feedback or input that we want to pass along to ASA, we'll have the, yes, Pam, we would have the ability to do that. So that would mean that our next meeting, instead of being March 11th, would be March 4th, 1 month from today. And instead of being April 8th, it would be April 1st.
Which has a special significance.
So would anyone like to make a motion for these changes? We can discuss them and then vote on them.
I'll move that we discuss those 2 dates.
Okay. In a second?
Second.
Okay. All right. I know at least one person said that there might have been a conflict last time, but any discussion? Okay. All right, so you're going to miss part of it, Mary Beth.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to, work my schedule so that I can, get to a little bit of both of the meetings. Because otherwise I feel like I miss important information that's happening on my campus, which then might be relevant for FAC and vice versa. So I'll just have to play around with that a little bit.
Okay. I've been thinking that we could move them to a different date, but I mean, I really don't know how much input we're really going to have on CCIC, but it does seem worth having the opportunity to discuss. So any further discussion or suggestions? Mike, Shay?
Yeah, I would just say that I do think we should do this rarely. I think it's really important. It just what Mary Beth's talking about. We set up our calendars, all sorts of meetings.
Right.
And I think you have a good reason for this, although you're right that we might not make a difference.
Right.
But I just think we don't want to get into the habit of shifting. Once we set it in the year, I think it's really safe to stick to it unless there's something pressing like this. Thanks.
Agreed. Jen?
I'm sorry, I missed it. Did you want us to move the dates up for next year as well, or do we not have the dates set out past these ones?
We don't. You mean like for next academic year at the end of the year?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know about those yet. And right now, at least we know that there's something we can coordinate with in terms of CCIC. At the end of the year, I don't know what's going to be happening. So we could just leave it as, I don't know that there'll be any significant gain, so we could just keep it as is.
So should we maybe set the dates twice a year instead of once so that we have more flexibility?
It's Pam. The board requires all committees to have their dates published and submitted to the Secretary of State for a calendar year, not an academic year. So we've submitted, there's a published calendar from January through December that we approved at the December meeting. They're easily changed, but I agree with Mike. If they can be handled, great. If not, then I believe I start creating the next calendar in September. We should sit down with Kalina and David and make sure that all of the issues that you're aware of at that point in time are reflected in the dates that you select for your meetings.
Yeah. And hopefully by next year, we'll also have some conversations about a different sort of workflow. We had sort of tentatively agreed to one before that never got put in place. So we were kind of guided by nothing this time when we were picking dates. So this time, I think, the difference will be that if we keep them as is, I will simply be reporting on what came through ASA and was approved. I mean, came through CCIC and was approved by ASA when we meet in March and April. If we switch them, there will be some conversation about what came through CCIC before, a week before ASA meets each time. That's the difference. I think everything aligns just fine with finance either way. That's right, David?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yeah. All right, are we ready to vote on these changes? Okay. All in favor of moving our March and April dates 1 week earlier? Any opposed?
Trees, aye.
And any abstentions? Okay. Thank you for that. And yes, we'll keep that to a minimum.
Great. Kalina and or David, could you drop me an email to make it official?
Yep.
That would be swell. Thank you.
Cool. All right. CEAC resolution. Ron? Could you introduce that?
Okay, yes,
Introduce.
we saw the documents at our last meeting that was shared, and Kalina discussed that with you. Basically, our Curriculum and Education Affairs Committee wrote to I think it was the APRC the first time, or no, I think it was either APRC or the Students First Alphabet Soup Committee. And basically explained why they could not fulfill their duties as to reviewing the aligned programs. There were 60 programs, and they were asked to review them in 3 weeks. And I mean, to review a program, the process that we go through is very extensive and very detailed, and takes you can't really do more than like 3 at most in one meeting. And so it was an impossible timeline and something they couldn't do. And so they wrote to indicate their rationale for why they could not take a vote on this. And they received a response back from Mike Stefanowicz, to which they then responded. And I believe that Kalina shared both documents with you at the last meeting. And at that meeting, at our last meeting, I indicated that I thought this would be a good thing for governance bodies throughout the system, the community college system, to endorse these comments as being applicable to their own shared governance bodies, and that those endorsements should then be sent to NECHI, so that as a public comment for the proposal that's being presented to them this month. So I created, and I also think the FAC may want to weigh in on this. So I'm going to put in the chat a statement that I'm going to move that we approve, and then we can sort of have a discussion. If I can get this to open, I'm having trouble with my computer right now. Oh no, let me okay, let me close. Okay, no, I think nope, it's still not opening. All right, let me shut down Word and reopen it. And let me see. Yeah, it's all right, let me get this back. Sorry.
While you're doing this, Ron or Kalina, is this something you were saying, Ron, that you made a statement? Naugatuck Valley made a statement to the system office, and they responded, and then you had a statement in response to that. And was that all emailed? Was emailed to us last time?
That's right. Yes, and we had a conversation about it last time.
Okay, all right, perfect. I can look at that again.
And now my computer is not allowing me to open up Word. So this is wonderful. I have so much stuff on my computer that it keeps telling me I don't have enough memory to run things. So that's the result of working from home. Let me see. Yeah, so many things have crashed. Why don't Kalina, do you want to move on to the next item, and I'll get this, and when I'm ready, we'll come back.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, let me get this. Right now my computer is a disaster zone. So I will try to get this fixed and I'll bring it back to the group, okay?
Okay.
Sorry.
I was looking. Just give me 1 second also. January
I
20.
may have to shut my computer down altogether and just get it and leave this meeting to come back to it. I apologize.
All right. See you soon, Ron.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, I just replaced my agenda. Oh, the Shared Governance Award for requests. So I forwarded you all the documents that I got from Ken Klubschnick, the sort of description of the award, the call for applications or whatever it was. It kind of describes what it is. And I think we mentioned last time both that this is an award that was sort of proposed, initiated by the FAC. This is kind of our thing. And also that while it's, I suppose, traditionally presented during the FAC conference, we don't have any support from the system office for the conference this year. That budget item was eliminated. So I'm not sure when or how it will be presented. But it does represent an opportunity for a couple of us to sit in a room with a couple of board members and talk about concrete examples of what is called shared governance and rank and discuss what meets that standard, what exceeds that standard, et cetera, right? So, you know, in terms of the functioning of this committee, it is an opportunity to really have meaningful dialogue. At the same time, we're in an environment where it may feel as if shared governance is not adequately respected. So I think it's worth us thinking about. I hope you have thought about it over the past month. Is there any discussion of this, and is anybody interested in serving on this? It would be 2 members of FAC and 2 members of the board. Lois.
I'm going to voice my concern about this at this point in time because shared governance has been trampled completely by these people, and by my feeling is, it's just my feeling. My feeling is that by agreeing to sit on this committee and choose and give somebody, some college or university an award for for their wonderful job in shared governance is just prostituting ourselves as far as I'm concerned. That's my 2 cents. That's all I'm going to say.
Mike?
I hate to be a prostitute, but I certainly understand where Lois is coming from, but I'm willing to do it because I think, even though I think the system office is not understanding shared governance well, I think certain campuses do. And this is an award to a campus, not to the Board of Regents. And I think it might be a good time for the board to sort of see examples or learn and through discussion and, you know, so I think I can see the downside of it. And Lois certainly makes sense about that. But I think since it's a campus and not the system office that would get the award, and if there's nobody to give it to, then I'd rather be there, be able to say, no, we shouldn't give it, rather than have them just give it to somebody because they have to give one or something. So I'm willing to do it.
Over and above, Mike. No,
What?
and I think those are useful distinctions too, right? Because we often sort of conflate the board, the system office. In many ways, they seem continuous with each other, but there is a difference between this system leadership in terms of the administration, which is the system office structure, and then the board, which is a separate entity, which in theory might not always align. And then the governance structures of our individual institutions, which for the moment exist, even if they might not for very long. Is anyone else interested in serving on this committee or voicing concerns about our participation? Fran?
I think it's more concerns. Do you have the composition of the committee, Kalina, who actually will be doing the vote?
It's supposed to be composed of 4 people, 2 from FAC and 2 members of the board.
Okay, so it's 50-50. You know, what I'm concerned, I'd be more concerned, obviously, if this was just token membership, but in this case, it doesn't sound like it is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to do it, but you know, my big concern is, once again, an institution is going to be rewarded that has, for example, done the consolidation work, where, you know, an abnormally large number of people have volunteered to do consolidation work, and that would be a way of honoring that institution. I'd hate to see that happen and faculty be part of that decision. I don't think I can do this.
Is your hand up
My hand's
again
back.
or still, Mike?
Yeah, my hand's back up.
Okay.
I was going to try to ask if I could persuade Fran to do it. I'd love to work with you, Fran, on this, and precisely for the reasons you're saying, that I just don't want to give it in the wrong way to the wrong group. I think it's important to have a university person and a community college person. And I, you know, I always like to hear what you have to say at the meetings, and so I would hope you I could talk you into doing it with me, because I'd feel better with someone who was approaching it with the same skepticism.
Okay. You've convinced me. I'll do it.
David?
Great. That
That's
solves the
great.
question. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's always possible that the committee agrees to only one award. If it turns out that there isn't sufficient shared governance at any of the community colleges. So that's an option that you have. And I think, you know, having Mike Shea and Fran, that would be a good composition for that, for the FAC component.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right too about that idea. We don't have to give it. And I don't think you could give it if it was 2-2. So
Right.
Hey, this is Jen. Is that for certain that you can opt to not give certain awards? Because I know that that wasn't the case on some of the committees that I served on prior to consolidation.
Really?
well, I'll just I don't know, Jen. I'm just assuming that there's criteria that have to be met.
Mhm.
And if you can say if we're convinced it doesn't meet the criteria, then we can vote no.
Yeah, I mean, even with like those teaching awards, you know how they would have us do those teaching awards, and if you won, you were stuck having to run those for the next 2 years. There were plenty of situations where the group opted not to move forward, and we were told we had to. Same things with sabbatical and things like that. So I've definitely been experienced situations where we had to hire someone where the committee didn't think it was the right thing to do and stuff. So I just went.
Well, then Fran and I can resign.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you would. I just didn't want you to.
No, I
throw that out there. That I just something to consider.
Lois?
Just out of curiosity, since there are 2 members from the Board of Regents and 2 members from the FAC, who breaks the tie?
Dual? Yeah, that's interesting.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe they're
And I would say good luck if one of those is David Jimenez.
They do discuss provisions if there are 2 candidates that are closely tied and you need further information, but they don't really talk about who breaks the tie. Let's make sure that I'm reading this correctly though, right? You all have looked at this also, right? Selection process, FAC and BOR will jointly select one CSU institution annually from the pool of applicants. They'll be reviewed by a 4-member selection committee consisting of current members of the FAC and BOR, 2 each. Well, it doesn't say 2 each, it says current members, but they've asked us to put forward 2 people. All right, well, I feel like we're going to be well represented. Is there anyone else who wants to put their name forward, or is this it? Thank you so much, Mike and Fran. I feel like that is an opportunity to have real conversations about what shared governance does and does not look like, and what our aspirations for shared governance might be. Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, and to your initial point, it's an opportunity to talk to these people, which we really do not have. It
Right.
may be of no value, but we don't know.
Right. Thank you. And I'll forward your names. They need names by today, so I'll make sure to do that today. All right. Funding. Hold on. Before we get to funding, we had modified the agenda to add the ACME questions. So you all have the ACME questions. It's in that email with the minutes and something else. Oh, and the final COVID resolution. So if we could take a look at that. I don't know if there's anyone who wants to begin discussion. I received these questions having been in conversation with folks who have a lot of questions about ACME, and not just like the general questions, but like very detailed, concrete questions about we're supposed to be designing courses, or we're supposed to be offering courses, or my program receives people who go through these courses. What do I do? And I kind of felt like I'm on the outside of these conversations. I'm not math or English faculty, and there are going to be moments where these folks have not been getting their questions answered. I might be in a meeting where there might be an opportunity to ask one of these questions, forward some of them. So these were basically forwarded to us because we've been offered, folks to come talk to us about ACME, and because there are going to be opportunities at, say, ASA or CCIC where these questions might come up and be answered, where folks who have been trying to get answers to many of these questions are hoping that we might get them. So I know I forwarded them to some of you who might have some input on like how do you have answers to these questions? Like maybe it was a non-issue, but it does seem that they are legitimate questions that still need to be answered. So does anybody else want to just sort of share on what, these questions, the list of questions that has been shared here? I'm gonna look for it.
There's Mary Beth.
Oh, go ahead, Mary Beth, sorry.
So I was just gonna say, I mean, I did get a chance to look these over ahead of time, and they're excellent questions, and really very detailed questions that are things that are gonna have to be worked out. And I just don't know that anybody's even thought of the questions. People who are, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the important piece of information to share. Is each individually, the questions are also important, but there needs to be people who are working on ACME who think of these questions, or at least have a way to request these types of detailed things. Because one of these questions completely separately, even though I'd already read it in that document, came up at a curriculum meeting yesterday, and somebody said, well, what about physics and 137 as a prereq? With that, are we going to have that course? And I was like, nobody knows the answer to that question at this point, and we don't know who's even kind of working on it. I don't really have any idea the best way to disseminate the questions or who to give them to. I just think they're great questions, and I think it's a shame that they haven't been addressed at this point. I mean, at this far into the process.
Right. David?
Yeah, I thought that, for example, question 5 about
And I'll share what
transfer of courses to the universities is an important consideration. And, I was surprised at the last meeting. We had a visitor from who was, sorry, I'm blanking on her name, who said that, oh, well, the Board of Regents resolution covers automatic acceptance of those courses at the universities. But I've spoken to folks in my university, and Mark Jackson is here as well, so he can confirm that or not. And that's not the impression they have. We're an autonomous institution. They have standards for placement tests and so forth. And I think there's going to be a significant problem.
Yeah.
So it's good to have these questions out there.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
problem
And
is in getting the answers.
right. And they're nuts and bolts questions. Like they need to be answered so that certain processes can move on. And I think when we were having a little bit of this ACME discussion last month, there was, the perception that maybe we just weren't in the loop. But these are questions that have been asked, many of them, asked and asked again, no satisfactory answer has been gotten. So, we have, I guess, and I'll just scroll through so that we can get the rest of them. But I don't know if there's anything else that folks want to highlight, but that's worth doing. But we have the opportunity, perhaps to forward them one more time, or even to simply document the fact that an application is being put in for a college where these questions have not yet been answered. In terms of the folks who have forwarded it to me, that was expressed also, or, some folks have expressed that also. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. I guess we have to figure out what we're going to do with them. And I'm going to just scroll through so that we have a lot of these questions here.
Colleen,
Is
can
there
I
any?
just ask a quick question? I couldn't find, they weren't an attachment, right? Were they in a link in your, I couldn't
No,
find them in the.
They were in an attachment. It's the email that is titled membership list, minutes, and ACME questions.
And from roughly when?
This afternoon, actually.
Oh,
I got these. Yeah,
sorry.
I got these yesterday.
Okay, that's okay. Thanks. That's why I got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. But you'll notice that these actually make reference to NETCHI standards here. So there is question there. Let me stop sharing. Actually, let me just get the last question on the list. And I'll stop sharing now so I can see. Right, so I'm just picking at random. Number 15, NETCHI standard 3.15 states the institution places primary responsibility for the content, quality, and effectiveness of the curriculum with its faculty. I feel like all the community college faculty know that one so well now. But it ends with math faculty do not support data collection from fall 2020 for the baseline comparative cohort. Math faculty do not support the requirement for transitional strategies to be deployed concurrently with co-requisite support. Math faculty do not support GPA as the only initial placement metric. Math faculty do not support multiple measures being implemented only when increasing placement. Math faculty do not support the creation of courses that must align to outside institutions rather than our campus needs. That's just number 15. Lois.
I guess I'm a little bit unclear. As far as I'm concerned, these should be sent to NETCHI with some kind of an introductory paragraph or two explaining that these questions have been asked of the Board of Regents and have not been answered over a long period of time. And we know the substantive changes going in next week. And so we're filing these as a public comment to NETCHI because we're not getting any answers. Where else, what am I missing? Where else should this, do y'all think this should go?
Well, I'll suggest one place. I think it should literally, and this isn't very effective yet, but I think it should definitely go to the faculty senate presidents at all the different institutions, especially the CSUs, who I think,
I
again,
understand that, Mike.
no, I know, I
What would that-
agree it should go
what
somewhere.
would it
I
do?
just wanted to
What
mention
I'm
that.
getting at is, where should this go where it might,
Yeah, no,
there
I
might be
understand.
some movement from it, because right now, I mean, obviously sending
Maybe
it to
we
the
should
Board of
send it to
Regents is a waste of time because then nobody's getting any answers and hasn't gotten any answers. So these should be directed to NETCHI. I mean, they're quoting NETCHI standards in there. They're discussing that. They're saying they're not getting any answers. This should be going in as a public comment to NETCHI.
I think that's right, and maybe we should even send it to the higher ed committee in the
Well,
legislature.
the legislature as well. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And technically, as if we approve it as a resolution with those provisos, a copy should be sent to the ASA committee. They can use it for information purposes. They can have a discussion on it. That's up to their leadership to decide. It's a new leadership there. We'll see what the results are.
Mhm.
So that I think is, pretty clear that it should be sent as a public comment to NETCHI, that it should be sent to the presidents of the CSU University senates, to the governing structures at the community college, the presidents of those, and as well to the ASA committee as a matter of reference. I'll move the motion.
Second? Is there a
Call the
second?
question.
Okay.
You don't have to call the question, let them second it.
But I do have one question. Do we have a process here?
I mean, if we vote to do this, then it has to be, we send it, right? So David and I take responsibility for circulating to the appropriate folks.
There needs to be an introduction to that if it's going as a public comment. You can't just send that, all those questions as a public comment. There needs to be some form of introduction in there.
Yeah.
Having written a number
Melina
of
can
comments.
write
I can
a
tell you.
covering letter, attached, please find the resolution approved by the FAC of questions for which the answers have not been forthcoming, and this has implications for the approval process at NETCHI. I think that's pretty clear.
And what is helpful is that the NETCHI standards are referenced in those questions.
Yeah, the only suggestion I'd make is that you skip a line between the numbered items. It's easier to read that way.
I would also say that if it's going to go to the legislature, I think Lois's notion of a contextual is a little bit bigger than, I mean, NETCHI knows what the issues are, but I'm not sure, I don't know. I think the
agree with you, Mike.
legislature has to get this in a context with a different letter than the other people, just so they know what the conditions are.
I agree with you. Right now, it's kind of esoteric academic stuff.
Right.
Which works with NETCHI, but as a public comment, but doesn't work with,
Okay.
legislators.
So Mike, we had been thinking that we have so much communication with higher ed, we would just forward the report and without, scheduling a meeting, but maybe this necessitates scheduling a meeting with higher ed chairs also, to fill them in. And a reminder that there's going to be a higher ed consolidation committee meeting on February 15th. The past one, we were very sort of, we participated in sort of contributions to that. In this one, because we don't yet know the final form of substantive change request, there's nothing for us to respond to. We haven't really been doing that, but these are things that we could provide to them in advance of that, if that makes sense. So if you're saying that, I agree with you. I think that it's a long list, and the sort of like practical effects of having these questions unanswered isn't necessarily clear. So we can see what kind of meeting we might have with higher ed chairs in advance of their consolidation committee meeting.
Yeah, we mentioned it in our report to the legislature as a sentence in paragraph section 1 on the background, section 6, subsection, good grief, subsection 2, right? And that's about as much as we can actually say at this point without a further and lengthy explanation. But we do have this as a background paper, and I think Kalina is right. At a meeting, then this is the kind of thing that you can sort of verbally present and then be so that it makes some sense to them. Otherwise, it's not something they're going to take a look at in any serious way. It's just too detailed. But to Neshi, to the University Senate Presidents, and for that matter, to the new chair of the ASA committee, I think that definitely that's appropriate.
Right.
So I've kind of moved the motion.
Right. And it was sort of seconded and the question was called, and I think I think we're ready to vote. And the list was David, legislature, Nechi, CEOs of the colleges, and governance chairs across the system. Is that correct?
I think so.
What about giving a copy to President Chang also?
Oh yeah, that has to go to the ASA and to the chair of the board and the president of the CSCU. Yeah.
If you're writing it as a public comment, it has to go to Chang as anyway.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, got that list. All in favor of forwarding this to those parties? Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions?
I'll abstain. This is Linda. I'm still trying to do 2 meetings.
Okay, so that's Linda and Diane abstaining. All right. And I believe we have gotten Ron back. You're the call-in, right, Ron? Ron, are you there? Said he was back in the meeting. Okay. All right, we'll keep searching for Ron. Okay, so while we wait for Ron, let's talk about funding. I'm a little less clear on what needs to be done here. But I do know that like we have been talking about the adequacy of the sort of state portion of the funding for our colleges, the over-reliance on tuition. We have been using, many of us use the phrase like full funding of the system, but it's very hard to figure out what that actually means in concrete terms, right? Is there a formula that we could use, that hits that mark of so-called full funding? Is there a number that formula could generate today based on what we know? At the moment, we don't really have that. I know that we are going to, I'm expecting some information from Ben Barnes about what our asks of the legislature, what the system's asks of the legislature will be this year. The number that he threw out there that was preliminary was that The community colleges will need $60 million. I don't know on what time frame to fill a deficit, and the CSUs will need more. We don't know how much yet. So we'll see what those final numbers are. But we also know that there are different, we conceive of the way that the system should be funded a little bit differently from the pattern of funding and our requests over the years. I think, by and large, we've been asking for almost, the bailout number to keep us going. It's been a series of catastrophes in a certain sense. And that's probably a really terrible way of putting it, but you know what I'm saying, right? This is what we need to do X, and we fill that gap. But there's no sort of forward-looking kind of, this is what it would mean to build a system that is adequately funded, stable enough that we're not constantly like surviving the next emergency. And I understand that system leadership probably doesn't have the time to think through, what is this best case scenario? But I do think it would be helpful for us to sort of put into concrete terms what it would mean to actually sort of fulfill the responsibilities that we have in terms of funding our system, so that it truly is, a state public system. It can function as such. So that we can sort of describe the gap between where we are and where we have been and what that number is, or what that formula is. So I think at the moment we are gathering some information, right? We're getting the numbers from the system. We will know what they are asking for. David and I intend to have a couple of conversations with Ben Barnes to refine the questions that we need to ask. I just want to know if there's anybody who has any input on how we should move forward in this, because so that we can get to the point where the FAC can make a recommendation about this, or provide some clarity in our talk about state funding.
This is Carmen. I don't have any specific suggestion, but I was just wondering from you or David, what are your thoughts on Ben Barnes being the one to talk to? And do you think that he is a good addition to the system office? Your thoughts?
I've worked with him on the Finance and Infrastructure Committee, and I find that he is very forthcoming, straightforward. If you ask for something, he will look for it and provide it. For example, when the issue came up of that new formula for distribution of funding to the 4 universities, I pointed out at the committee meeting that the justification or the background paper from the system office was inadequate. It was just 2 pages. We had at the same meeting a policy to rename buildings and programs, where the staff report was over 12 pages long, covered all the questions you might have, whereas this, on how the universities would be funded, didn't answer basic questions like, would the universities have a more favorable or less favorable funding under this new formula? When I asked Ben Barnes for a clarification, I got it, and the answer was 2 of the universities, Central and Southern, would lose $1.5 million per year. So I think that if you ask the right questions to Ben Barnes, he is a competent and CFO, and he will provide the answers. And I think we have some interesting questions to ask him, especially the ones that Kalina has formulated.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that also. I think that the major challenge is that there are different objectives, right? The actual direction that the system is going is one that is sort of guided by, I think we all remember, maybe was it last year or the year before, Jane Gates basically said, look, we have to do better before we're entitled to ask for more funding, right? So we have been contorting ourselves and reducing certain aspects of our services before we will ask for more. And I think there's the practical running of the system kind of approach to this. And then there's the aspirational, like, what, from in a moral sense, do we owe the state of Connecticut? And we have the privilege of being able to ponder that a little bit and think outside of the day-to-day operations. So while I know that talking with Ben is, you know, he can very quickly give us the numbers. Here's what we need to keep ourselves going. The challenge of really, like, I have some questions for him, but I think the real challenge for us is formulating the right questions to get the right kinds of numbers from him. For example, we know that enrollments are possibly going down. So if we want to talk about funding ourselves at you know, at a level that is equivalent to another point in history where the system was funded in a more healthy way, right? We would need it. Would we need it to be like a ratio of like funding to? It would be faculty to enrollments. Would it be funding to enrollments? What do we do about this? The portion of the funding that now goes to the system office that is larger than, you know, the amount that goes to many of our colleges. How do we factor that in and adjust for that so that we can actually translate those numbers from then to now? Is there some other conception of what that funding would be? And I really have had a hard time thinking through that. And I think it's worth our time to think through that. We have a research committee, but I think that this is less about finding numbers and more about figuring out what questions to ask. So I don't know if folks want to contribute to how we should proceed in this, or whether you even think that this is something that we can achieve together, you want to spend time on right now. But this is something that I find particularly interesting. And I should also mention that in our talking about this, we are at an interesting moment, right? I don't know if Lois, you will talk about this, but you know, state kind of has money, and we have also our unions, 4Cs and AAUP, are a part of a coalition, the Recovery for All coalition, that is really sort of making asks about what it would mean to expand state services and what are the practical ways that you can actually do that. So this is not a sort of pie in the sky theoretical, what are we doing, but more a way of informing people who are currently tangibly fighting for adjusting our very aggressive tax structure and adjusting the way that we fund our services, who need to know, like, okay, well, if you wanted this, how much do you need? And we can't currently answer that question. And I've been literally asked that question. And so that's a bit crippling. Lois.
Why don't we start out with the op-ed that was written by John Patillo last week, the president of Sacred Heart University? He produced some, frankly, very startling numbers in there about how poorly Connecticut supports higher education. I mean, example, percentage allocated to need-based aid in neighboring states was dramatically higher than here at home. New York invested 15%, New Jersey 23%, Vermont and Pennsylvania 22%, Connecticut lagged significantly at 3%. There's something he goes here. It is shameful to consider the contrast in the percentage of change in state financial aid and funding between 2008 and 19. Spending in Vermont increased 19.2%. In Rhode Island, 47%. Pennsylvania and New Jersey increased their spending 32.6% and 34% respectively. Connecticut spending decreased 57.5% over the same period. Those are kind of dramatic numbers.
Could you share that link with us?
It's on, I put it in chat. It's already in chat. I put it there about 1:36.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, these are startling numbers, startling, and they come from
Private.
op-ed from a private the president of a private university in Connecticut, who is also losing students and saying enrollment in Connecticut is down because students can get more financial aid by going to New York or Massachusetts or Rhode Island than they can in Connecticut.
Yep. And this has come up at board meetings, right? Why are we losing students? Why are they going, you know, elsewhere? That's part of the answer.
These numbers are depressing. They frankly are absolutely depressing.
I'm gonna ask that, so I had originally thought that maybe there should be some sort of report or something like this, but I'm really not sure what the ask is on this, but I guess I would ask this. Perhaps we can return to this next month and see if we can formulate how we want to proceed in providing this kind of information, because I do think that this funding question is the source of many of our problems, including even the governance issues that we're talking about, right? The whole premise of our overly centralized system is about cost savings and so on. So if we can really talk about what it and the relationship really between funding and our capacity to function in a way that is consistent with our status as public institutions. The more that we give stuff over to, whether it's consultants or, whatever, the less that we're actually functioning that way. Mike.
Yeah, I think a couple of other things that, I don't know how much to ask for either, but I think one of the important things is for us as educators to be the ones explaining to legislators why we need the money, instead of, I'm not saying in addition to the system office and the CFO, and people like that, because it's on the ground in the trenches stuff that we're talking about, right? Like,
right.
Sacred Heart probably has a really small ratio of faculty to students, and those students may be stronger than our students, and they have, in other words, everything's upside down, right? So that the public institutions have the students who need the most help, and they have the least resources. And it, even if they're just talking about workforce development, which I think has to be explained that it's not, it's about democracy and having educated citizenry, as the last 6 years would indicated. I think it's important. It's not just about the amount we're asking for, it's sort of the principles need to shift a little bit. I think they just don't understand why education is expensive.
Right.
Training isn't expensive. You can train a lot of people in one class, but you can't teach people processes of thinking and reading and writing in that kind of factory way. It just takes resources, and then of course mental health resources, all sorts of things. So I think it's really important that that we support the systems office request, but with an explanation of, it's just an expensive proposition. There's no way to make education cheap and still have it be education. It would only be training.
Right. And, and I think that's the way that we kind of diverge to from the system office is going to be asking for money. We're going to be talking about money also, but I think the way that we can communicate to legislators about how to conceive of the value of it, why, how it should be sustained and not just offered in emergencies, is going to be really important for our future, right? Because instead of constantly recovering from a series of emergencies, we might be able to, like, I don't know, grow and have a plan for the future and maybe thrive a little, right? So I think now is a very good time to be thinking about this and to be making it concrete and I think basically what you said, Mike, makes me think that perhaps this should eventually take the form of a full report, right, to the legislature, explaining both the effects and, the needs, right? Because next year is a budget year, and we want them informed and thinking about how to support us adequately next year. We report to appropriations. We are perfectly placed to address the thing that ails us most, I think. So I guess I'll propose that we return to this next month, and maybe at that point, some of us will take responsibility for producing some sort of document that can help guide legislators when they're thinking about how to fund us. If that sounds good. Cool.
Start out with that op-ed, just send it to all the legislators.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, and it's complicated also by the fact that we are one part of public higher education in the state.
I know,
The other elephant in the room would be UConn.
right.
And I'll just give you two numbers that have come up recently. Deficit for their sports, despite the fact that they have that winning women's basketball team, is $47.2 million last year. They just got a judgment from an arbitration over a fired coach for $11.2 million. And we haven't even begun to factor in, which I think is quite unfortunate, the deficit at UConn Health,
Mhm.
which honesty and reporting I go to, I'm quite satisfied with. So it is complicated, and I think it will be good, your suggestion, Colina, that we come back with a report at the next meeting of the FAC, and we see what we can do about digging up numbers, which would be appropriate. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
It's going to be difficult. It's a difficult task. And
It
that's
really
why in the report to the legislatures, which we approved earlier, what we did was mention full funding with at least a 10% increase per year. But that was just a number thrown out there, and it could be much more than that would be required.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Ron. Ron.
Oh dear.
Ron. I'm gonna put in the chat. He sent me the statement that he was gonna propose. So I will put that in the chat at least for us to look at and see. Everyone.
You know, while you're looking at that, I just want to say in the chat, when we look in the chat, what David was saying about UConn, it's so funny that Jane Gates says we have to do better before we ask for more money. And look what UConn's doing, and they're getting more money. They're not doing better. They're deficits, and I mean, it's shameful.
Yeah. All right, so as you read that in the chat, hopefully
You want to put that up?
yeah. Okay,
You capture it and put it up?
sure. Let me transfer it to a Word doc because it's hard to read in my email. Sorry, I'm just laughing. I text Ron that I couldn't hear him and he replied, so I've noticed, so.
I've got it in Word.
Okay.
I'll share it if I can find
Oh,
it.
it just hit share. We got it.
Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay, got to make it bigger.
Ah.
Yeah, too big.
Yeah, too big. I was ambitious. There we go. All right. Faculty Advisory Committee to the Board of Regents supports the critical feedback that Naugatuck Valley Community College's Curriculum and Educational Affairs Committee, CEAC, has provided to the following system-wide bodies leading consolidation of college curricula: the Academic Program Review Committee and the Students First Academic and Student Affairs Consolidation Committee. FAC attests to the accuracy of CEAC's concerns throughout the community college system and call on those leading consolidation efforts to reform the process to ensure faculty-led development of rigorous and appropriate curricula. We also ask NECHI to review these concerns as public commentary and to respond to the deficiencies in shared governments and curricular development represented in these documents. Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay. A second?
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor? Or do we need any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That's Diane. Thank you. All right. Great, and thank you, Ron. I know he can hear us. We just can't hear him. So thank you. All right. FAC conference. So traditionally, we've hosted the FAC conference first week in April. Weird years. We pulled it off last year by making it a Zoom conference. This year we might, anything's open. So any thoughts on how to move forward with the conference? I think it, like the award, is one of those things that might be a heavy lift right now, but is quite an opportunity that we might not want to pass us by. Jen.
I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity on the process of being an FAC member, because when I first, this is my second time around, but when I first came on the group, it seemed like there was a lot of expectation that members will chime into discussions and take on other roles outside, like being on subcommittees and stuff. So I do know that, you know, dealing with regional and statewide conferences over the years, that it's a lot of work. So I would just like to start the discussion by encouraging people who haven't been serving on subcommittees or maybe taking an active role in the FAC to consider working on this group, because I feel like if the work's divided by many people, it's much easier because it's a huge task. And I feel like the deadline comes up before we know it. So I don't know, you know, how we can do that moving forward for the next 2-year cycle so that everybody has an opportunity to chime in and serve on a different committee and things like that. It just seems like it might be a good opportunity for people who haven't had that experience to take on a small role. And I don't know if we have a document about all the steps and what the procedures are, but I would just hate to see like the same, like 2 or 3 people getting stuck doing this massive job rather than just weighing on comments, but looking at the workload. Because it seems to me, just my observation in the last 2 years is that, like, you guys go to so many meetings and you're so well prepared and you send us all these documents and we read them, hopefully, and stuff. But I think that as a committee, we can all do more to pull our weight in the direction of us all chipping in. That's just my observation from the last 2 years. So for whatever it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mike.
First of all, I agree with everything Jen said. Secondly, in the past, really, the conference was always planned in like September, October, November.
Yep.
I just don't think we can. I mean, I don't know what we could do to make it happen this year. But I do think we need to do it next year. I don't think we should just drop the thing, but I think we should just start early next year, and it might help to get involved some of the people who've done them before, so that people aren't starting from scratch and not knowing what to do. But it really, you know, in the past, all the ones that happened before COVID, and even the one right before COVID was planned later than the others.
Right.
They were all planned much earlier and involved a lot of people from FAC and from other places, and coordination. And so I just think, I don't know what to say about this year. It seems like it would be very difficult to make it happen at this point.
I agree, and we should also mention that we used to have, how much was it? Was it 5,000 or 8,000 from?
8,000.
8,000 from System Office. The unions usually chipped in, sometimes colleges. Now, of course, those were different times when they were expected to be on ground. There was lunch provided, paid for a speaker and so on. So whatever this is going to be a total reconception of FAC conference. It will be a completely different thing. And it no longer necessarily needs to be in the spring even, right? So it's really a question of, is there something conference-like that we want to be able to do together this academic year, or actually not this academic year, this calendar year, because we do have 2 calendar year terms. And we can call it the FAC conference because that has been, something recognizable. Yeah, Jen.
I was just wondering, do we have a document in place that outlines the steps for things? Because I know when I used to be on the 2-year College English Association's conference committee, and we, there's a lot of aspects to it. So it may be one thing we could do this year if we don't do something for the spring is, as a group, generate a document that has all the steps and get in a cycle where people rotate in and out of the positions. And it's not such a burden for 2 people coming in, 2 or 3 people coming in to do all of those things. I would love the idea of opening up conversations to faculty so that I think the FAC does a great job of informing us, and I think the reps do a great job of reporting back to their campus communities efficiently. But I would love to hear more faculty voices in terms of how well they're recognizing the work that's being done here. I feel like we're a little bit disjointed as a system in terms of people realizing how key this committee is. And I don't know how to facilitate those discussions, but maybe something more informal that's gathering voices and generating a document we can pull from, where we're not just saying faculty are saying this, but we actually had a meeting about some key ideas and we got to capture that. It might be something to rely on and report back to. Not to say that all the big topics aren't important, but I think that as we talk about low morale, I think the way to improve that is for people to feel heard.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I'm going to make a super low stakes ask. Are there any 2 or 3 people who are willing? Sorry, go ahead, David, before I do that then.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was originally thinking maybe we could try to do something online about, this idea of system of systems, or the CSCU as a federation. But, listening to what Jen and Mike had to say, I realize we have the calendar year to do this. And it does make sense to plan it for the fall with some of the kinds of preparations that Jen has been mentioning. And that gives us a lot more time to do it, yet we still do it in the 2022 calendar year. And it might be also an occasion for people to get together in person, because I'm, like most of us, hopeful that this pandemic comes to an end. But I don't know. I didn't want to preempt you, Helena.
My suggestion and sort of the reluctance, and I think you make a good point, Jen, the way that we sort of like passed on the information before was just by having a whole lot of overlap of the committee. So there are materials, like in terms of, there is a template for the call for papers. There's a template for that. There are templates for everything. Yeah, see, Maribeth, right? And there's a lot there that will be handed over, and there will certainly be some overlap in the past committees for sure, right? I know, some of us definitely can't take on full responsibility for leading it, but will absolutely be there. But my suggestion is that I'm asking for 2 or 3 people who are willing to meet and brainstorm about the viability of any sort of event hosted by the FAC this calendar year, and some ideas about what this conference really needs to be going forward, given the fact that it is not funded by the system. Last year we had it funded by our unions, and it was a wonderful sort of collaboration there. But there is a need to reconceive this, and I think that's part of the reluctance, in addition to the fact that, like, there's just so much right now. So if we can at least get a couple of people to volunteer to have that brainstorming session outside of this meeting, and bring back something and do some recruitment perhaps, I think that will at least get us somewhere. I don't want to just let it die. Ron's back. Hello, Mary Beth. Hey.
So I was just gonna say, I absolutely could not take on like chairing a committee about this, but I would be willing to be part of a small group to brainstorm.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to do some brainstorming? Yay, Diane. Is that you're joining the group?
Hi, sorry, my computer has just been not cooperating this entire meeting. I would love to be part of a group. Certainly new to this, so I would really love to hear from some veterans, but I would love to be part of a brainstorming group.
That is great. I think Myrna was just such a part of that, so that's excellent. Carmen, you're in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to be part of this brainstorming group. I am new to this, so I'm still a little unsure, like what has been, really done in the past. One of the things I just wanted to mention, just pick up what Jen said. I really do feel like there is, at least at my college, and I can't say for all the colleges, but that just the bringing the information that the faculty advisory committee and some great valuable documents about like questions for the Board of Regents and the document that Ron sent out, I do send to the Senate co-chairs. And so, but I'm thinking I might also just share it as a faculty advisory committee member also with the college. But I just really feel like that there is still so many faculty and staff that really have no idea all the great work that you're doing. And so I think that it might also be something where, like maybe some of the people on the committee, we could work together, just kind of come up with just like a general statement, including these documents, and say, maybe we can send it out to each person here will send this out to the college, and then maybe actually solicit input from the faculty and staff about what are some concerns you have, we want your input, and then maybe we could use that information to help with maybe providing some ideas for the conference. I might be missing the whole thing on the conference, but I just feel like we just need to get more of the faculty and staff involved in what is actually going on. And then maybe if we ask them what their input is and what are their concerns they have, that maybe that can help with faculty morale. And then maybe, again, maybe that's not the point of the conference at all. I don't know. But that's just something I want to, just kind of throw out there.
I think you echoed some of what Jen is saying. And it's like, I think also I kept thinking about it as a way of like bringing stuff to, like it's an event. We need a speaker. But I think Jen, you made me really reflect on the fact that it's also a place to receive from a larger group of faculty and staff, right? And both of those things are really, really important. And we could skew it one way or the other, depending on the year or what is necessary. So we can find that out. Well, we have a group of 3. Thank you so much. Mary Beth is a veteran and did so much last time. And I'm happy to be part of those conversations if I can fit into whatever you arrange. Call me for whatever. I get the feeling that David will probably be receptive to those conversations too, because we've had loads of conversations about what that could be. And again, in the past, we have had members on the committee that aren't necessarily, like not all the members of the committee are FAC members. So in the brainstorming and the thinking through what kind of support you might need, you can think outside of our group also. So yeah, let us know. Thank you, brainstorming committee. Okay, last item is bylaws revision of 2022. I'll say a tiny little bit as 1/3 of the election committee, and leave it to you, Lois and Jen, to say more. I'm not absolutely sure whether a bylaw revision is necessary. It can be quite time consuming. However, I think you all know that I sent out the version of the bylaws that we have last meeting, and Linda mentioned that there was an error in it, and this is something that we've known for a while, and it's specific to the elections process for Charter Oak. It's obvious that it's an error because it is inconsistent with what's found elsewhere in the document, but because of I was actually present at that meeting, though not a member at the time when those bylaws were voted on. So I know that it's supposed to be fixed, and yet we can't find the final version of that. So if nothing else, that correction needs to be somehow officially done to the bylaws. Again, it's minimal, but it needs to be done. And then I think that Jen, Lewis, and I discovered that we at least need some guidance on how to run some of this, because we have this complicated statewide election. There are lots of questions that folks have. And because we don't have the ability to send out ballots statewide, or at least we currently don't. I'm sure there's a way we can work it out with System Office and get some sort of ballot thing. It gets messy and complicated. So I don't know if it's a bylaw revision or a set of guidelines that we need to provide to folks. But there seems to be a need to do something with our bylaws, and we need a group of folks to take responsibility for doing that well. And I'm going to really request that whoever takes responsibility for this agrees on a versioning process before anything's done, because it's painful. What is our process for versions? So yeah, Lois, Jen, I don't know if you have anything to say about this. Oh, Linda, go ahead.
I will. I fully applaud your effort to have a versioning process, because the truth is that correction was supposed to have been made, but I just don't think, I'm not sure if it ever even was made on the subcommittee's computer. I think at some point I sent out what I thought were some final versions to different folks, but that's it too. Nobody agrees to how they're named or labeled, and yeah, I don't know that there's and I also don't know that there's a necessity for a bylaws revision subcommittee. I understand that we do need that mistake corrected, but I don't think that requires a committee. And I can appreciate that some clarification and guidelines are needed for the additional complications of the election process, but I don't know that, again, that's not necessarily a bylaws revision. I think your suggestion of that being some attached guidelines might be helpful there too. I'm willing to search. I think Mike Shea, actually, sorry to put you on the spot, Mike, but I think Mike and I both might have those final versions of the last one. I specifically remember even sending one out, even though I wasn't on that subcommittee. So I can search. For some reason, I'm thinking Mike had access to some people who were in those meetings. I'm not sure. Sorry, I rambled.
What's the last thing you said that we asked what?
I think that for some reason, I thought you may have had that final version, one of those final versions of the bylaws too. I'm not sure if we were sharing those after that last meeting or what that was, because it wasn't just the mistake on the Charter Oak election process. There were just some basic typos that had been caught as well. And I think you and I tend to be the ones that catch those typos.
Yes.
So that might be it.
This is Patrice. I have one from 4/4/19. When do you think the last one was?
Oh, that's
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to do some real digging, and I have not even had I'm sorry, Kalina, because you've asked, but I have not had the capacity to do it. I just don't have any bandwidth left whatsoever to dig through the many versions. But I can try to do it one more time, but I think when this committee, with the membership we have right now 2 years ago, I think I sent it, that one, and it might be the one Patrice is mentioning, out to everybody.
Right. So I think like this level, and this is from the beginning of 2020, there's been a lot of, you know, right, back and forth trying to confirm this. And I don't think that's any way to move forward with bylaws. So we need some action, right? We need some conversation, some final action of a final version of these bylaws. There is that the version that has served as the final version that we know has that error in it for all of this time. And I would propose that we take it, because it's very clear what needs to be changed, right? Take it, correct it, and have a discussion about whether there's anything else that has been overlooked in terms of fulfilling the mission of the revision of 2019. And there may be some supplemental commentary that I know, like maybe Jen, Lois, and I might want to provide, or folks who struggled with things at their colleges as they tried to execute an election. That we might want to just talk about, because there are some legitimate questions, right? And about it is no longer as clear as it used to be. The point of the 2019 revision was to make sure that each college was represented. Who's at a college is no longer as clear as it used to be. So there might just be some commentary that needs to be provided to make sure that process is clean. And like even as simple as email lists, where do the email lists go, and do they catch everybody that is supposed to be caught in this election process? Those lists are shifting. So is there anyone who is willing to participate in, I believe it will be a minimal and quick review, but it's necessary so that we don't have questions hanging over our heads about bylaws. Just a review and a conversation of the bylaws as we have them. And hopefully someone who's familiar with like making the versioning process.
I just sent a document to Linda, and I'm wondering if that's what it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Sent a couple too, Mike.
Patrice. I'm on 2 computers, but it doesn't look like I got any email from anyone. So yeah, I've not received email for y'all. Just said that you just sent those.
Okay.
And I'm willing to spend that much time to try to look through what all I have and see what I can think is fine. I just literally have no bandwidth left yet whatsoever. So
I'm with you.
I will do that.
And the
one.
concern is that we find one that matches here and we haven't read through every single detail elsewhere. And I'm worried about that. So,
right.
So we know that the version that we have is correct. Otherwise, is it possible that we can agree that, you know, Mike, Linda, and Patrice could communicate between this meeting and next and just establish where we are with these bylaws? Lois.
I just want to say that I have a set of the bylaws dated June 14, 2019 that are in track changes, and they're comments and edits made by Stephen Adair. I don't know. I have no idea if this was ever adopted, accepted, or if anybody has anything later than that.
Yes, I do. The thing I sent Linda is what Stephen was working on, but it's months later. It's in 20, I think January of 20. So
okay.
And the difficulty here is that they are, hold on.
I don't know if it's right though. I don't know what it is. It's just something I had. So
Right, and they were actually approved in March of 2019. So, yeah. We definitely need, outside of this meeting, a group to get together and establish final version that we are going to approve at a meeting somehow, maybe two meetings from now.
What I don't
Jen?
understand is what the, oh, I'm sorry, the other people with their hands up. I'm just not sure what the issue is. Why, are we saying that we might have two different documents that, but anyway, Jen and Lois have their hands up, sorry.
The version that has been established, that has been circulated as the final version for the past 2 years has an error that was spotted at the very same meeting where this was approved. That is in Charter Oak's, sort of the election process described for Charter Oak. It is described correctly in one part of the document, incorrectly in another part of the document, and it was supposed to be corrected in a final version sent out, right? So it was approved with that correction. We just cannot find the document where that correction was made. And so that is the one that existed when it was approved. So that's the one I personally feel safest with. Jen and then Lois.
I'm not sure how this will all play out after consolidation, and but what was most surprising to me in the whole election process was the Senate chair's ability to read the email of what we were asking them to do, and how many people just didn't follow directions. So the next time around, once the bylaws are all set and we're sure who we're communicating with, et cetera, I think we should make a note to send people a heads up that this is coming and the steps there, and then send it again as the directions, and then the reminder to maybe bold it or somehow, I don't know if you even need to have a live meeting for 2 minutes, but I was just shocked that these are professionals who didn't read directions, directions that were repeatedly sent.
To be fair, part of it is that it's hard to track the purpose of what we are doing, right? Like you have to understand what the heck we're doing in the first place. So folks are already like, didn't we already do this? So yeah, we definitely have to do, that could probably be part of it too, like just an information sheet on how we do this and why we do it that way, etc. Lois and Pam?
And can you just tell me what the error is, and I can look at this document to see if it's corrected here?
Can we do this offline? Can any 2 or 3 of you agree to take responsibility for doing this offline, simply because it's after 4?
I mean, I think we can do that. I just, like Lois, though, I think I want to know what the mistake is. So
Linda can.
The mistake is, I think how it happened, I'm not sure because I wasn't on the subcommittee and I really don't know who did it because nobody ever said so. But it looked like a second section was added to election process, and a different way that's incorrect was written and put in that section. So there are now, for some reason, and I think it's because of expanding the election process and making those changes, there's 2 sections on the election process. The original section from the original bylaws is still correct. Ours is unusual and unique, and I get it, we're a unique institution. Our election process is through our academic council. And somebody probably just maybe, I don't know how the error happened, but anyways, that got changed. And it got changed in one place. And initially, I think it got changed in both places. And then when it was caught, it just got changed, corrected in one spot, maybe the new spot. So the old spot that has it correct still refers to our academic council. And the new spot refers to elections in a different way, which is the incorrect one.
is it the document I sent you, you think?
The one you sent me, I've opened it, and that looks like that's the one that I had agreed to help on way back when, in terms of not just fixing that, but fixing the typos, because I can see all my commentary about the typos in there. And I actually put commentary, instead of just adding a period, I put the reason why, or instead of adding a capitalization or whatever, I put the reason why. And I see that is dated, looks like from February 20. And so I believe that probably would be the last one, but that would have been taking the one that we'd voted on, and then I think what happened was at that meeting, we also recognized the typos. And so that would have been the one that we worked on with the typos, but I wasn't on that subcommittee. I don't think you were. And so maybe our typos just stayed out there in the ether world somewhere, you know?
Pam has her hand up, as does Lois.
Lois, go ahead.
Just a quick suggestion, when it all gets polished and clean and everybody signs off on it, and it's dated and tracked, however you're going to do it, I will find a place to post it on the website so that you know that that's the final repository of your bylaws, and anyone who has a question will go there, and that's the document moving forward that you'll revise the latest and greatest.
Yep. Thank
So
you,
just
Pam.
let me know and I'll find a home for it.
Great. Thanks. Lois?
The document I'm looking at has academic council in there twice, and it looks like it was corrected from a previous, it was corrected from a previous document.
Okay. So we might be okay on this.
This is still in track changes.
All right, we're gonna have to return to this. But it would be much easier if we had at least some minimal subcommittee that could then recruit further members, and so that we can handle it between now and the next meeting. I think for now we have to post the 2019 revision as it is, and then we'll eventually post the 2022 corrected version. Because we got to have something, right? All right, we'll have to return to it. Any motion to adjourn?
I mean, I'll be willing to look at the thing I sent Linda.
Right.
Linda and I just feel like I'm kind of not fully understanding what needs to be fixed, but it sounds like Linda does.
Yeah.
So if Linda has any time, I could do that. I just don't understand quite what we're looking for yet, so.
Okay, that sounds good.
Right, and I can do that too. And I think what happens, I think Lois has it as well. And probably what Mike sent me and the track changes Lois is talking about, those were the things where we were also trying to fix the typos. And I think this also happened when there was a change in membership and leadership, and nobody ever made that final.
Okay.
I think that's probably what happened. So it could be that between the version that Mike sent me and the version that Lois has, they're probably the same, and Lois's has the changes and track changes, and mine has it in, you know, the other one is slightly different. I don't know. But
So-
there's no final clean copy, I don't think.
Can Lois and Linda and I meet, Linda and Lois, is it okay with you if we meet at some point before the next meeting?
Sure, Mike.
Sure, and I think, Lois, if you could email the one you have, and Mike, the one that you just emailed me, maybe email that to Lois and the committee, that'd be fine too, good too.
And to add to the confusion, I might have one more version from Barbara.
Yes, yes, if you
I
could
sent
send
you
that to us, that would be helpful.
Sure.
I also sent an email from Barbara that asked if she could, you know, if it would go under the board's website, Board of Regents. So I just sent it all to you.
That, yeah, we'll see if that matches the one that we've been using. Okay, so it's gonna be handled. We have some folks working on it. Motion to adjourn. Right? We don't need seconds. And
So moved.
Anthony, is that Anthony in for the vote?
Anthony's here. He's voting.
Oh, is that Ace? Is it Ace?
Ace would like to second the motion
Oh,
to adjourn. He's our new puppy.
Oh,
And
so
it's-
cute.
You know, when you're having a difficult class and the students aren't happy with the material, always bring puppy pictures. And so for a long FAC meeting, I thought this would be appropriate. This is Ace. He's just a little bit over 3 months old, and he's very interested in having an adjournment so I can take him out for a pee and a poop.
So long.
Bye, y'all. I'll stop the recording.